Leaders. The Deputy Speaker.
Are there any constituency statements by honourable members? I call the member for Calais.
Deputy Speaker, on Saturday I had the honour of attending Bathurst Business Chamber's Carillion Business Awards. The awards celebrate the remarkable achievements of our local businesses and the outstanding men and women behind them who contribute so much to the life of our communities. It was truly a night to remember. Today I pay tribute to this year's exceptional winners. Apprentice and Trainee of the Year, Daisy Jones from Bathurst Little Learning Centre. Excellence in Customer Service, Dance and Divas Pole Studio. Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion, Colton Computer Technologies. Excellence in Innovation went to Be Active Physiotherapy. Excellence in Large Business, Skillset Limited. Excellence in Small Business, 5 to 20 employees, went to Precision Martial Arts and Fitness. The Outstanding Community Organisation Award went to Central West Women's Health Centre. The Outstanding Employee went to Dylan Donoghue of Vivability. And the Outstanding Employer of Choice went to Glenray. Outstanding New Business went to Amy Staffing, and Outstanding Young Business Leader, 35 years or under, went to Kevin Walker of Vivability. Well done, Kevin. The Outstanding Business Leader, 36 years plus, went to Warren Hickey of Precision Martial Arts, and the People's Choice Bathurst Favourite Business went to Studio Duchess. The People's Choice Award Bathurst Favourite Tradie went to Riley Robinson, who works at Devro, and the People's Choice Award, Health, Fitness and Wellbeing Employee, went to Maddie Power of City Fit. Well done, Maddie. The People's Choice Award in Hospitality went to Cafe Viva, and Bathurst Most Outstanding Business went to Precision Martial Arts and Fitness. Well done to Warren Hickey and his family. Congratulations to all of the winners. I also wish to acknowledge and thank this year's event sponsors. The 2024 major sponsor was Kelso Electrical and Brad Schumacher. Brad was one of the MCs for the evening and did a sterling job. I also wish to acknowledge Acumen Accountants and Business Advisors, Airworks Group, Bathurst RSL Club, Business New South Wales, Bathurst Regional Council and Charles Sturt University. CSU's Jack Underwood was also an MC and did an outstanding job. I also wish to acknowledge GT Digital Solutions, Kenny Spring Solicitors, Inland Digital, Reliance Bank, Skillset, Vanessa Pringle Floral Designs, Verdo, Vivability, Cafe Viva, 2BS 95.1 FM and B-Rock, and also the Western Advocate. I also wish to acknowledge the hard-working members of the Bathurst Business Chamber, including President Paul Jones, Graham Burke, Secretary Sam Forbett, Kate Gulliver, Sean McIntosh and Isabel Fox. It takes a lot to put on an awards ceremony of this scale, and the Bathurst Business Chamber did an outstanding job, and you can see why they won the 2024 Western New South Wales Business Awards Outstanding Local Chamber. Well done to the Bathurst Business Chamber, and congratulations to all of the nominees, winners, sponsors and the Bathurst Business Chamber and everyone who contributed to making the 2024 Carillion Business Awards such a success.
Has expired, and I call the member for Spence.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Having a child offers two very different extremes for a parent. It is on one hand the most exciting and rewarding time of a parent's life. There is genuinely nothing like it. But on the other hand, and at the same time, having a baby can be extremely stressful and very isolating for many families with young children. And in my electorate of Spence, these challenges are often made harder by the existing disadvantages for families in the north. Because parents in our community, perhaps already going through hardship from just having a child, which is often in finance, in healthcare, even in their personal relationships, these challenges are made even more difficult by services that can be harder to access up north, by generational disadvantage that informs a mistrust of intervention services. Those issues strike at the very root of what I and this Labor government seeks to address wherever we can, which is that socio-economic, sometimes psychological, gap in communities to connect families into society so they can thrive. That's why I sought to host a Welcoming the Babies event in my electorate of Spence, and I was privileged to be able to do so last week on Thursday in Elizabeth. It was incredible. We saw 80 families register with their babies. Over 24 organisations host stalls with some incredible prizes for families donated by those organisations as well. It was a space where families could be welcomed into our community, where support services from all three tiers of government, from non-government providers and non-profits, could assist them with their needs. And we had an incredible time doing it, with some fantastic activities and play areas set up by the amazing organisations involved. I'd like to thank the two special guests for their attendance on the day. Firstly, the Honourable Member Emily Burke, MLC, State Assistant Minister for Autism in South Australia, whose trailblazing work in the autism space cannot be understated. And of course, our very own Minister for Early Childhood Education and Minister for Youth, whose enthusiasm on the day was absolutely infectious. Thank you so much for coming to our community. I would also like to note the hard work that went into organising this event, to the City of Playford, the Playford Early Childhood Alliance, and in particular the working group for this event. That's Susan Petrie, Lisa Jenkins, Jo Saunders, Samantha Mullins and Tracy Alexander. Thank you all very much for your support and hard work in helping myself and my office put this together. You've helped to deliver a significant precedent-setting outcome for families in the North, because these events are circuit breakers for families. Your work has meant that every child who went through the Civic Centre's doors last week will now be that much more connected to our community and essential services in an area that needs a helping hand the most. Thank you so much.
Call the member for Mallee.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I am delighted to get up this morning and discuss the Parliamentary Friends of Organ Donation. I have just finished a particular event with my very good friend, Dr. Mike Freelander, and to have people who have received organ donations standing amongst us this morning and those who have donated organs. It is possible to be a living donor, to donate a kidney and still live. And we met with a couple this morning where the husband had provided a kidney for his wife, who has also had to have a liver transplant. She was a very bubbly, wonderful woman, and it was delightful to meet her. Mike and I started the Parliamentary Friends of Organ Donation back in 2019, and that was the first event where I brought my granddaughter who has received a liver transplant. She's now 11 years old and thriving and doing very well, but it was a traumatic period of time. I'm fully immersed in how hard that journey is. And I want to give a shout out to every family who has lost a family member and who has donated organs to others that they might live. And in fact, I have a staff member who is in that position, whose child very sadly died and has donated organs so that others could live. That is an incredibly courageous and brave thing to do. And this morning we stood in the courtyard of the Speakers and discussed how wonderful humanity can be, that we can reach out and provide and give and share that others can live. It's just mind-blowing and extraordinary, and it makes me very proud to be part of the human race. And it's not often we can say that in these days. There are so many challenges that we face, but I think organ donation is just one of those things. October the 1st to the 6th is the Organ Donation Transplant Games here in Canberra. I had the privilege of being at the World Transplant Games last year in Perth in March, and it was a significant and wonderful event, you know, to see a pool of swimmers who had all had and experienced organ transplants and who were competing in events. It's not an easy journey. There are so many challenges that people with organ transplants have to live with and to manage their lives. And here they are on the world stage, coming from all over the world to compete together. It was incredibly encouraging. Again, that human spirit that we share together. So I just want to give a shout out to that. And I am in my... No, I'm going to have to leave it to another speech, but I will be back.
I call the member for Barton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There was a time when the local newspaper was a fixture of front lawns across our suburbs. Often they'd fly out the window of a station wagon with varying degrees of accuracy. Local media has been there to cover the issues that matter to our communities, the ones bigger outlets weren't interested in. Times have sadly changed. After 104 years' service to our community, the Canterbury Bankstown Torch has printed its last newspaper. Both in my time in this place and as member for Canterbury, the Torch gave me the platform to speak to constituents. More importantly, It was a way for them to speak to me too. It was accessible and free. My team and I would like to thank the diligent editors, journalists and staff who have worked over the years. Our community will miss you. I would also like to acknowledge another fixture of my time as member for Barton. Eve Isa and her father George bought her brother's fruit shop under the Cogra railway station 33 years ago. Like many successful small businesses, Eve's Apple quickly became central to the Cogra community. Many stopped to buy fruit and veg fresh from the Sydney markets. Her 4 children more or less grew up in the shop. They helped Mum behind the till and setting up for the day. In sad news for the community last week, Eve sold the shop and has retired to her son's home in Greenacre. And I can assure you it's a retirement she has absolutely earned along with her family. I appreciate her support during my time as a local member and wish her well-earned rest and a happy retirement.
I call the member for Longman.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Recently, I had a community forum in the Longman electorate around homelessness and housing affordability, which is as bad as I've ever seen it. Like many communities around the country, there are so many people sleeping in parks, on benches and in tent cities that have sprung up. Plus, there has been a massive uplift in couch surfing, which is certainly not as visible as the other cohorts I've already mentioned. The forum was attended by concerned community members and organisations that either have empathy or are physically involved in assisting people who are experiencing difficulty when it comes to housing. The format was a panel that included a local real estate agent, Karen George from Richardson and Wrench, an organisation that provides meals and groceries to the homeless called, for those doing it tough, called Eat for the Streets, represented by founder Michael Cox, and City of Moreton Bay Councillor Adam Hayne. Just some quick stats on the City of Moreton Bay homeless. The number of clients financially assisted with payments for short-term emergency accommodation grew by almost 280% from 2018 to 2023. And there are 2,517 people on the public housing wait list in this just one local government area in Queensland. Deputy Speaker, I suspected the 1.5 hours allotted for this forum would not be enough, and unfortunately I was correct. We had only managed to discuss the issues and barely touch on solutions, which was the main objective. So I'll be holding a second event in November that will focus on solutions to the problems that we raised at this first forum. We heard from Janice, a local 74-year-old who shared her story, which was, for many years, she had been renting a granny flat from a couple at the back of their property. The couple have now sold and the new owners can't rent it to her. Janice is a single woman on a pension. She doesn't even own a car. She approached the State Housing Department and was told, sorry, we have nothing available. I asked the real estate agent how the private rental market was, and she shared they have over 1,000 properties on their rent roll, and there are at the moment 3 up for rent, and at the inspections on these properties, over 40 families are turning up. Not one of them is under $700 per week rent. Janice said she was now looking for a street corner or a tree to sleep under. Landlords often bear the brunt of the blame for increasing rents, but they've been forced to raise their rents due to the massive increase in the average price of homes. In Caboolture South, the average price has risen from $411,000 in 2019 to $645,000 in 2024. So therefore, along with the 12 interest rate rises that we've had in the last couple of years, it's just made the mortgage repayment so high that they are forced to increase their rents. The only good news that came out of it, Deputy Speaker, was there was someone who was at the forum that was actually able to find Janice a home. So I'm pleased to say that Janice won't be sleeping under a tree. She'll be sleeping in a bed, and rightly so.
Call the member for McNamara.
Thank you very much, Acting Speaker. Last year I held a roundtable in my office with the Assistant Minister Stephen Jones, Dr Jane Tiller and advocates and members of our community who were confronting potential discrimination by life insurance companies due to genetic predispositions. And this morning I once again joined with Dr Jane Tiller and the Minister to announce that the Albanese Labor government will implement a total ban on the use of genetic testing results in life insurance. This will save lives, and this will mean that people can get the healthcare that they so desperately need. We have ended the ability, or we will end the ability, to discriminate based on genetic test results by banning their use in life insurance underwriting. And we know that genetic testing can save lives, and we know that the technology is evolving each and every day. We know that the technology can change the way medical practitioners prevent, diagnose, treat and monitor a range of conditions, including cancer and so many others. However, for too long, Australians were also not getting potentially life-saving genetic testing because they were scared of being discriminated against by life insurance products. They prevented themselves from making decisions about their own health out of fear of missing out on life insurance that they potentially needed. And today, we announce that we are fixing this. Because no Australian should be discouraged from undertaking critical and vital testing out of fear it could impact their ability to get life insurance. This morning's announcement was led by wonderful and passionate advocates in our community, and the decision makes us a world leader in removing barriers to genetic testing. Throughout the process, the Minister consulted academics, community members, health professionals and those with lived experience. There was an inquiry as well, which received over 1,000 submissions, with 97% supportive of the total ban, which we announced this morning. Now, for women with a mutation of the BRCA gene, and especially inside the Jewish community in McNamara, there is a high prevalence of the BRCA gene. And this can lead to a whole range of a higher proportion and a higher percentage of cancers, especially breast cancer. We heard this morning from one of the most inspiring and incredible people. Her name was Cara, and she spoke about her own experience with the BRCA gene. I also, and I just want to pay tribute to her for her courage and her bravery and for leading this reform, because it will help save others in her position. I also want to acknowledge the Australian Council of Life Insurance, who have fully supported our policy to ban the use of genetic testing. But finally, the real tribute for this speech goes to Dr. Jane Tiller, a professional in genetic testing at Monash University, a tireless advocate, and someone who has fought and won this important reform for others and for Australia as well.
I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to inform the Parliament of the coordinated approach to migration taken by 10 shires and a regional city in my electorate, and how federal and WA Labor are strangling their initiative. This week, I wrote to Assistant Minister for Immigration, Thistlethwaite, expressing grave concerns about his recent response to me regarding an application by the Regional Development Australia Great Southern on behalf of the 11 municipalities for a Designated Area Migration Agreement, or DARMA. Mr Thistlethwaite has only been in the job for a few weeks after Mr Albanese demoted his previous immigration dream team of Andrew Giles and Claire O'Neill. So I do not blame him for the tardy response to my letter, almost 6 months after I wrote urging Mr Giles to expedite the approval of a DARMA for WA's Great Southern region. My 6 months on hold to Australia's immigration hierarchy pales in comparison to the 16 months that the Great Southern has been waiting for a decision on its much-needed DARMA. My main concern from the tenor of Minister Thistlethwaite's reply to me is that a DARMA for the Great Southern may be dead in the water. If that's the case, it would be a savage blow to a region that has long been a primary industries powerhouse but is struggling to attract workers. The Great Southern is one of the 2 regions nationally to be hit hardest by Labor's looming ban on live exports. So it was heartening to see hundreds of farmers at the front of Parliament House yesterday demanding that Mr Albanese can the ban and keep the sheep. Minister Thistlethwaite's letter extolled the virtues of a statewide DARMA recently settled between WA and the federal Labor government. But the new statewide DARMA is not a regional agreement. WA has 9 regions, each with its unique industry and development needs. A stark illustration of this is that 126
Division has been called for in the House, and the proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent division. I call the member for O'Connor in continuation.
A stark illustration of this is that 126 occupations proposed under the Great Southern Dharma are not on the WA Dharma occupation list. The WA Dharma will best serve the state's great mining regions, while the Great Southern has an agricultural and tourism-based economy. Labor's Bulletin Gate advocacy for a statewide Dharma ignores this basic fact of regional economics. As Dharmas are introduced to reflect the regional diversity, any move by Labor to block existing applications for regional Dharmas in favour of a statewide one would be a very bad move. I've called Mr Thistlethwaite to confirm that the Great Southern Dharma application is still under active consideration. Continued delays or refusal in favour of a top-down statewide Dharma would disadvantage the 11 regional shires that have come together to finalise a bespoke regional agreement tailored to the requirements of the employers in the Great Southern. Such initiatives should be nurtured, not left to wither on the vine. I've urged Minister Thistlethwaite to ensure that, after significant delays on the watch of Mr Giles, the Great Southern Dharma is approved forthwith.
I call the member for Swan.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Are you a young change maker, and what change do you want to see? These are two questions I asked young people. These were people that were aged 16 to 17 years old in Swan, and I received some amazing replies. A change in less screen time and being able to feel safe online. Another said, I would like Australia to become a place where we are not separated by labels and to give to them where everyone is celebrated for their individuality. We also had, I would like to see changes that make housing in Australia more affordable so people can live fulfilling lives. And how about this one? One of the things I'd like to see in Australia is more equitable access to healthcare services, particularly in rural and underserved communities. Growing up in an urban area, I was fortunate to have easy access to decent healthcare. However, I'm well aware that this is not true for many Australians who live in rural and distant areas. For such communities, receiving healthcare services frequently requires long-distance travel, which may both be time-consuming and costly. This difference can result in delayed treatments, poorer health outcomes, and decreased quality of life. I believe that every Australian, regardless of their geographical location, has the right to timely and effective healthcare. These were powerful quotes from young people in the electorate of Swan. What it shows is that young people care about the future and their community. They care about a future that we are creating for everyone, not just a few. I'm excited to be hosting the first ever Swan Young Changemakers Conference in partner with Pawsey, a supercomputer facility in Tech Park in Swan. What's best is that this will not be death by PowerPoint or a lecture by politicians. These will be conversations facilitated by young people. Young leaders like Jemima Williams-Wong, a councillor at the City of Fremantle, Maisara Muzaffar, the Youth Citizen of the Year, and Denzel Jackson from the Perth Redbacks Basketball Club. Also, Molly Collard and Emily Williams, who are working with young people to generate ideas and create environments that young people want to participate in. These are the young leaders of today and the futures of tomorrow. These are young changemakers who will shape the future of our nation and inspiring young people to follow in their footsteps. I'm listening to them and working with them.
Thank you. The member for Menzies.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, we have the great honour of rising in this chamber and the other one to acknowledge the work of volunteers. And it was Winston Churchill who said that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And I would like to single out some volunteers in my community who were recently recognised in the Manningham Civic Awards. To the 2024 Citizen of the Year, the award went to Brian Tyden. And I know Brian very well, and many of you might know his voice. He is the president and presenter on 96.5 Inner FM, and he's a volunteer. He works tirelessly and constantly for ways to support and serve the community in a variety of different ways. He has the time and the energy to go above and beyond. And when I meet Brian at events, he's smiling and I smile. It's infectious. And I'm so proud to see him given this award. They singled out in particular him being a champion of the Rotary movement and in particular the Rotary Manningham branch. And I just want to say how proud I am of you, Brian. I'd also like to acknowledge two winners of the Doreen Stoves Volunteer of the Year, Luke Bastian and Kate Nell. Luke has played a crucial role in the scouting community for more than 2 decades, as well as Rotary and the Doncaster Baseball Club. He is a dedicated member of the Manningham community. And as you can see, volunteers who give in one area more often than not give in many others. The other award, Kate, is an outstanding individual who consistently makes remarkable impact to the community through her volunteering efforts. Over the past few years, Kate has dedicated her time and energy to enhancing and enriching the lives of others, including the Sharks Junior Football Club. So thank you, Kate. And then 2 others I'd like to acknowledge is the Community Organisation of the Year went to the Rotary Club of Manningham City. And there are so many dedicated volunteers in that Rotary Club who consistently turn up and give that most precious asset, their time. They're busy people, they have lives and other jobs, but they give their time in the service of others, and I thank them for it. And then finally, to the Sports Volunteer of the Year, Anthony Milicia. Anthony dedicates himself to volunteering with the Manningham Juventus Football Club, and as if it was a second job. He sets a positive example for motivating others, and his actions are a source of inspiration for the whole team. So congratulations to all of the winners. I'm extremely proud of you, and I'm proud to have recognised you here.
Thank you. The member for Chifley.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. On the morning of 31 August, our Chifley community and I would say the country lost an incredible person in 102-year-old Uncle Wes Mahon. Big and Bull man, Uncle Wes lived on the lands of the Darug for over 50 years, was well known and much loved across Western Sydney, strongly advocating for bringing different worlds together, working tirelessly to share culture and build understanding. Grew up in the 1920s in southwest Queensland, where his granddad taught him how to hunt and told him the dreaming stories he'd later pass on to future generations. And at the age of 9, his family were forcibly removed from country and taken to the Deadbird Mission in New South Wales. Uncle Wes lived through World War II. He lived through the stolen generations. He served in the Royal Australian Navy during the Korean War. In the 1960s, he moved to Mount Druitt and he called it home ever since. He was one of the first Indigenous people in Sydney to tell his stories in schools. Many people in Mount Druitt know him for this. His parents remember him from school assemblies, and students, even those who are now adults, remember Uncle Wes from the time he came to speak at their school. He touched the hearts of school students, teachers, community organisations in 2770 and beyond. He was a founding member of the Mount Druitt and District Reconciliation Group, and for the past 27 years they've held a reconciliation walk every year, bringing our community together. One of my fond memories of those walks is seeing Uncle Wes conduct the smoking ceremony, encourage everyone to take part. In 2022, when Uncle Wes turned 100, I was proud to be present when the Mayor of our city, the late Tony Bleasdale, presented him with the keys to the city. He was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for his long-standing service to the Indigenous community of Western Sydney. He published a book of poems, Through Old Eyes, in 2022 and toured across the country with his show Fire Bucket. He was invited by Stan Grant to appear on a Q&A episode and talk about his book. And what I've mentioned is just a drop of water in the bucket of what Uncle Wes has done in a life spanning 102 years. Our hearts go to his family, loved ones during this time. He was a great, great, great-grandfather, a storyteller, someone who loved helping our community, building understanding, dedicating himself to ensuring Indigenous culture passed to the next generation, particularly in our local Mount Druitt community. There's so much to say about this person's life, But I'll finish by saying this: the world is better because of Uncle Wes Maan's commitment. I would like Hansard to note the footsteps of a great Australian, and may he rest in peace. Thank you, Uncle Wes.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 193, the time for members' constituency statements has concluded. I call the clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 2, Crimes and Other Legislation Amendment, Omnibus number 1, Bill 2024, resumption of debate on the second reading.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I thank honourable members for their contributions to the debate on this bill. The bill will update, improve and clarify the intended operation of key provisions in the Crimes Act 1914, the Proceeds of Crimes Act 2002, the National Anti-Corruption Commission Act 2022, the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act 1979, the Telecommunications Act 1997 and the Criminal Code Act 1995. These amendments are required to support the proper administration of regulatory, law enforcement and oversight processes. The amendments to the Crimes Act and the Proceeds of Crime Act and consequential amendments to the National Anti-Corruption Commission Act in Schedule 1 of the bill will modernise law enforcement search and seizure powers for cryptocurrency and other digital assets. Similarly, the amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act in Schedule 2 of the bill will modernise law enforcement powers in relation to information gathering powers and freezing orders to apply to cryptocurrency exchanges and the accounts they administer. The amendments to the Crimes Act in Schedule 3 of the bill will increase the value of the Commonwealth Penalty Unit to ensure that financial penalties for Commonwealth offences remain an effective deterrent to unlawful behaviour. The amendments to the Telecommunications Act and Telecommunications Interception and Access Act in Schedule 4 of the bill will provide certainty that the Attorney-General's Department is responsible for carrying out the telecommunications access functions through the Communications Access Coordinator, and the Department of Home Affairs is responsible for carrying out certain telecommunications security functions through the Communications Security Coordinator. The amendments to the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act in Schedule 5 of the bill will support improved oversight of state and territory integrity agencies and their use of interception powers. Amendments to the Criminal Code in Schedule 6 will extend the sunsetting date of the secrecy offence in Section 122.4 to 29th June 2026 to ensure that sensitive Commonwealth information continues to be protected while the Government considers and implements 2 recent reviews of Commonwealth secrecy provisions. Amendments to the Criminal Code in Schedule 7 will retrospectively amend the definition of hors de combat in the dictionary of the Criminal Code to correct a drafting error and confirm consistency between Australian domestic law and international law in relation to war crimes obligations reflecting the original legislative intent when the provision was introduced in 2002. In conclusion, the Crimes and Other Legislation Amendment Omnibus No. 1 Bill 2024 will support the proper administration of regulatory and oversight processes, assist law enforcement agencies deter criminal behaviour to enhance the protection of the Australian community and ensure Australia is able to uphold its international obligations. I commend the bill to the House.
Thank you. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I put the question. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against no. I think the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Second reading, a bill for an act to amend legislation relating to the criminal law, law enforcement and telecommunications and for related purposes.
The Federation Chamber will now consider the bill in detail. I understand it is the wish of the Federation Chamber to take the bill as a whole. The question is that the bill be agreed to. And I call the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I present a supplementary explanatory memorandum to the bill. I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move Government Amendments 1 to 7 as circulated together.
Is leave granted?
I move Government Amendments 1 to 7 as circulated together. The Government is introducing amendments to the bill that will implement Recommendation 1 of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security's report on this bill and make minor amendments to the bill to ensure that it operates as intended. I will also introduce 2 additional sets of amendments which I will return to shortly. Item 1 of the Government amendments changes the commencement date of Schedule 3 from 1st July 2024 to the 14th day after this Act receives the Royal Assent to accommodate the later passage of the bill. Item 4 is a routine amendment to reflect changes in ministerial responsibilities following the Administrative Arrangements Order made on 29th July 2024, which transferred administration of the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation Act 1979 to the Attorney-General. This amendment will ensure that the amendments to establish a Communications Security Coordinator in the Department of Home Affairs operate as designed. Item 5 responds to Recommendation 1 of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security's report on the bill. This amendment will ensure that the Western Australian Parliamentary Inspector of the Corruption and Crime Commission of WA is able to receive information under the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act 1979 in similar circumstances to other state and territory oversight agencies. Items 2 and 6 introduce a new amendment to the bill to extend the sunsetting date of the secrecy offence in section 122.4 of the Criminal Code by 18 months from 29th December 2024 to 29th June 2026. This amendment will ensure that sensitive Commonwealth information continues to be protected while the Government considers and implements 2 recent reviews of Commonwealth secrecy provisions by the Independent National Security Legislation Monitor and the Attorney-General's Department. Items 3 and 7 introduce a new amendment to retrospectively amend the definition of hors de combat in the Dictionary of the Criminal Code to correct a drafting error that was made when the definition was first introduced in 2002. The amendment will ensure consistency between Australian domestic law and international law. The amendment reflects the Parliament's original express legislative intent when the provision was introduced. I commend these amendments to the House and I think I've tabled the supplementary explanatory memorandum.
Thank you. The question is that the amendments be agreed to. I put the question. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against no. I think the ayes have it. A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. So we had just resolved the question that the amendments be agreed to. The question is now that the bill as amended be agreed to, and I put the question. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against no. The ayes have it. This bill as amended has been agreed to. The question now is that this bill be reported to the House with amendments. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against no. The ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Government business. Order of the day number 3. Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill 2023. Resumption of debate on the second reading.
Before the debate is resumed on this bill, I advise the Federation Chamber that in the House it has been agreed that a general debate be allowed covering this bill and the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Transitional Provisions Bill 2023. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the Assistant Minister for Immigration.
Thanks.
That's not right.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Speaker.
Sorry.
The rubber's hitting the road, or maybe the fins are hitting the water, is a better analogy when it comes to the government delivering on its commitment to ensure Australia acquires a nuclear propelled, conventionally armed submarine capacity through AUKUS. And this bill creates a framework to regulate the nuclear safety aspects of activities relating to AUKUS submarines with an objective of promoting the highest levels of nuclear safety. Consistent with the commitment of AUKUS partners, Australia will uphold the highest standards for safety, security and non-proliferation. This includes in relation to facilities that will support AUKUS submarines in Australia. The focus here is on creating a new regulatory framework to ensure nuclear safety across Australia's nuclear-powered submarines. So this framework will establish a dedicated fit-for-purpose nuclear safety framework, set out clear safety obligations for personnel involved in nuclear-propelled submarines maintenance and operation through a licensing regime for persons conducting regulated activities with serious civil and criminal consequences if there's a breach of the law. Establish a new independent statutory regulator, the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator, within the defence portfolio, independent of the defence chain of command, and empower the regulator to operate within a system of regulation alongside domestic agencies and, where appropriate, to collaborate with our US and UK partners. The Transitional Provisions Bill will allow any of the relevant licences issued by the CEO of the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency to transition to the new regulator, where they will be regulated activities under the legislation. The government is committed to ensuring the bill establishes a robust, effective regulatory framework to maintain the highest standards of nuclear safety. The Deputy Prime Minister introduced these bills in November 2023, and they were referred to a Senate committee, and on the 15th of May that committee published its report and 8 recommendations, but ultimately recommended that the bill be passed. The government has accepted in full or in principle all of the recommendations of the Senate committee and will make amendments to the bills to address these. In response to those recommendations, the government amendments are to clarify that the bill does not authorise the establishment of facilities for the purposes of civil nuclear power, the enrichment of uranium or the reprocessing of nuclear material, establish a requirement that a person must not be appointed as or remain the Director General or the Deputy Director General of the regulator if they've served any time in the previous 12 months as a member of the Australian Defence Force or a staff member of Defence or the Australian Submarine Agency. Thirdly, establish a ministerial advisory committee to ensure the minister has independent advice relating to the regulator, its independence and its effectiveness. Allow the Minister for Defence to share reports from the Director General with Ministers for Health and Industry and Science as the ministers responsible for our Panzer and ANSTO respectively, and to provide greater sharing of information and application of nuclear safety best practices, and additional penalties for obstructing, hindering or intimidating a member of the regulator to further strengthen the regulator's powers and their independence. The government will make other amendments to the bill, including to extend the commencement of the bill from 6 to 12 months to ensure an orderly transition to the new regulatory framework. Together, these amendments will strengthen the bill and ensure the highest standard of nuclear safety within Australia's conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. Australia has decades of nuclear safety regulatory experience and a robust framework to regulate current domestic civilian nuclear activities in fields such as nuclear science and medical research. However, this framework, Speaker, was not designed to consider the unique activities associated with naval nuclear propulsion in a military context. The environments in which submarines operate are inherently hazardous. That's why the government is taking steps to establish fit-for-purpose, specialised regulatory frameworks for nuclear-propelled submarines. While nuclear-powered submarines have a number of roles, they are Navy vessels designed to operate in hostile undersea environments. Regulating the nuclear safety aspects of this enterprise requires a system that is calibrated to addressing the unique hazards and risks associated with sensitive military capability. This new regulatory system will consider the needs across the life cycle of a submarine to ensure the highest standards of nuclear safety and protection are applied. The government has made a decision to establish this new independent regulatory authority within the defence portfolio, and the regulator will remain independent and its organisation will not be subject to directions or commands from the Australian Submarine Agency, the Department of Defence or the Australian Defence Force in the performance of its duties. Having the regulator accountable to the Defence Minister is consistent with a need to ensure nuclear safety is unique in the context of defence operations. This approach is broadly consistent with regulatory models in the United States and the UK, which have separate defence nuclear safety regulators. The government is also amending the bill to strengthen the independence of the regulator by ensuring an appropriate separation period from serving in the Defence Force. The Director-General and Deputy Director-General must not be appointed unless the Minister is satisfied that the person has the competence, independence, technical expertise and relevant experience to lead the regulator. ADF members, including reservists, are excluded from being appointed as a Director-General or Deputy Director-General of this body to ensure that the regulator remains independent. The term of the Director-General or Deputy Director-General must not exceed 5 years, though they may be reappointed for further periods, and the DG must not hold office for a total of more than 10 years. The ANSPS bill will also include a new definition of Defence staff member to include ADF service chiefs, ADF members, APS employees of the Department of Defence and the Australian Submarine Agency, in addition to the Secretary of the Department of Defence and the Head of ASA. The extra qualification around the appointment requiring a separation period will help ensure the independence of this regulator. The government is committed to ensuring that Australia is a responsible nuclear steward and maintains the highest standards of nuclear safety in respect of nuclear-powered submarines. Australia will not manage, store or dispose of spent nuclear fuel from the US or the UK submarines. To put this matter beyond doubt, the government will amend the bill to make it clear that nothing in the bill authorises the storage or disposal of spent nuclear fuel from the United States or the United Kingdom submarines. For Australian submarines, we don't expect that there will be a requirement to manage the high-level radioactive waste until the 2050s, when our nuclear-propelled submarines are defuelled at the end of their life. This waste will be stored and disposed on current or future defence estate sites, and the government will announce the process by which it selects this location in due course. All radioactive waste must be managed in line with international best practice and in accordance with Australia's international and domestic legal obligations and commitments, including the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, or the Treaty of Rarotonga as it's commonly known. All radioactive waste will be managed in accordance with Australia's comprehensive safeguard agreements and additional protocol within the International Atomic Energy Agency. The government is also strengthening the security and the scrutiny of reporting of nuclear safety incidents. The government will amend the ANNPS bill to include additional public notification requirements of certain nuclear safety incidents. This amendment addresses the scrutiny focused on different approaches between the ANNPS bill and the RPANS Act around incident notification. This provision means that incidents must be tabled in Parliament alongside any action taken by the regulator on relevant licence holders. So I want to be perfectly clear, Speaker, about this. These bills deal only with nuclear-powered submarines, not civil nuclear power. The government will amend the bill to explicitly state that the legislation does not support civil nuclear power activities and does not displace Australia's long-standing moratorium on civil nuclear power. So these amendments will make it clear that the bill does not authorise the construction or operation of certain facilities, including nuclear power plants, that are not related to an AUKUS submarine. The government's been very clear that Australia's nuclear-powered submarine program, including how it will be regulated, is fully consistent with our long-standing non-proliferation obligations and commitments. And we've worked closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency through every step of the process and will continue to do so. AUKUS is a core pillar of the Albanese government's national security policy to protect our nation, our interests and our security. Central to the government's approach to AUKUS is ensuring that Australia is a responsible nuclear steward. Australia is committed to the global non-proliferation regime, and the Albanese government is committed to maintaining the highest standard of nuclear safety in relation to our future conventionally armed nuclear-propelled submarines.
Thank you. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Sturt.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and indeed I rise to speak in support of the second reading of this bill. I commend my colleague, the Shadow Defence Minister, the member for Canning, on the way in which he has, of course, engaged very proactively with the government on all things AUKUS, because we are very proud of AUKUS in the coalition, and having served in the previous Parliament, one of the great achievements of the Morrison government was undoubtedly achieving this spectacular breakthrough of giving the Royal Australian Navy access to nuclear propulsion technology through the AUKUS agreement. Of course, we know that this is US technology, the absolute best technology available for nuclear propulsion, particularly for our purposes, having a nuclear reactor that does not have to be refuelled every decade or so like most do. This is technology that allows a fully fuelled reactor for the entirety of its life to be provided to us thanks to that US technology, and that is transformative in the capacity for us to have that sovereign capability for the Royal Australian Navy. And I remember very well when the announcement was made between the three leaders, President Biden, Prime Minister Johnson and Prime Minister Morrison, and there was indeed a great sense of history at that occasion, because it had been around 70 years since the United States had decided to provide the United Kingdom with this technology in the 50s, and then in 2021 agreeing to expand that circle of trust, of including only one other nation, the United Kingdom, to now include Australia. And it's a very significant marker in regards to the esteem that we are held in as a nation and a national security ally with the greatest power on the planet, the United States. They do not share their technology willingly whatsoever. And there are a lot of nations that are extremely jealous of the opportunity provided to us through AUKUS. It also extends, I might just note as an aside, well beyond nuclear propulsion technology. This is, of course, the most eye-catching component of it, but it is a defence technology sharing agreement that provides enormous opportunity beyond nuclear propulsion as well. But nonetheless, that is what we're here to debate, and we welcome the opportunity to keep this program moving forward. As an Adelaide MP, not surprisingly, I speak regularly on submarines in this chamber and have ever since I was elected in 2019. I've been involved in the issues of submarine construction, for what feels like my entire adult life. I've been at many interesting press conferences for many interesting milestones around submarine construction, particularly out at the ASC headquarters in Osborne. And there's been a lot of politics around submarine construction for a long, long time, and the people of South Australia are completely sick of it. We want certainty, we want the jobs that have been promised for a long, long time by all sides of politics to start to flow. So indeed, seeing legislation move through this parliament is heartening that we're making progress, although I do still have concerns at the pace at which the program is moving and when and what the important industrial and economic dividend for the state of South Australia will be on this project, always remembering that first and foremost we prioritise capability and the national security interests of our Defence Forces, and in this case the Royal Australian Navy, which is why we very proudly support the acquisition of this transformative opportunity and capability. But it's also very important, particularly on a bill like this, to note and point out and keep on the agenda the very important task of holding the current government, the previous government and any future governments to account for the commitments from an industry point of view and from an economic point of view that have been made. I remember back when we were building conventional submarines, there were very dramatic press conferences held by the now Foreign Minister, Senator Wong, other senior South Australian Labor members about a word that we used to hear a lot, which was local industry content. And we miraculously don't hear that from the now government when in opposition they like to talk about it so much. And I'm very hot on just what proportion of the AUKUS submarine construction will actually happen in Australia. Not just Adelaide, absolutely the shipyards are in Osborne. There's no question that the pressure hulls will be welded together there and a whole amount of manufacturing activity will happen there on site. But there's an enormous amount of supply chain activity when it comes to the construction of submarines. And we want to keep this government on notice that we're watching very closely around what decisions are going to be made from a supply chain point of view to make sure they benefit Australian industry. Happy to be in partnership with the United Kingdom and happy to be building together this AUKUS submarine, designing it together, constructing it together, and it has to be together. We know the first of class will be built in Barrow-on-Furness in the United Kingdom, and that's fine, that's for the Royal Navy. We equally need to know and understand at every opportunity that the government spruiks this project just what are the latest details around timeline and around industry content when it comes to the Australian submarines. And what we can't stand for and what we've got to be ever vigilant on, I'm not making an accusation here, I'm saying we have to be vigilant on this, that we never have a risk of governments and particularly the Defence Department trying to make arguments that it might be easier for more and more of this program to happen in other parts of the world other than Australia. Sovereign capability comes from the ability to build and maintain these boats in Australia. And if we start outsourcing more and more of the supply chain, that means componentry. That is a huge impact on future maintenance. If the worst case happened, I don't level this as an accusation, but if the worst case happened and people start to say, well, maybe it'll be easier to build them over in the UK, then that will be a spectacular betrayal of the Australian people and the defence capability of our nation. So I don't believe that's going to happen, but I think when we're having debates like this one about this AUKUS program, we've got to reflect on and look at commitments that were made and track them against where we're at right now, because I'm not confident that the submarine yard construction is at the pace that the government said it should be at by now. So hopefully there's more information from the government around timelines for building the shipyards out there at Osborne to construct our submarines. There's a little uncertainty about how many submarines we will be building. Frankly, there's talk about uncertainty about how many we'll be acquiring potentially from the United States. We know we're putting billions of dollars into helping to build shipyards not in Australia, shipyards in Connecticut and Barrow and Furness, and that's fine if it's properly outlined and reconfirmed to people what is actually happening in Australia. And as an Adelaide MP, I'll always take the opportunity in these sorts of debates to relitigate those points and to make sure we're monitoring what the government is telling us and how they're staying on track with commitments they've made that start to slip to being a year or two ago, that need to stay on track to give us the confidence that we are getting what we believe that we're getting. There's a lot of money going into this program, and as much of it as possible needs to be spent in this country, both from an economic and industrial point of view, but also from a national security and national security capability point of view. Now, the bill, of course, creates a framework for the proper stewardship and custody of nuclear material. Again, the nuclear waste debate I've been very closely involved in for what feels like most of my adult life. The former State Labor Premier of South Australia, Jay Weatherill, undertook a Royal Commission in 2015 with the objective of storing about half the world's high-level nuclear waste in the state of South Australia. So that's he's from the Labor left, and it was his position and his government's position that we take half the world's high-level nuclear waste and store it in South Australia. So he and the Royal Commission have done a lot of work on advocating for South Australia to host a lot of nuclear waste, and I anticipate that as Defence continue to move through their processes of determining where the waste will be stored, they've obviously put some parameters around it, particularly that will be on Defence land. My strong expectation, based on Labor Premier Jay Weatherill's work, is that that will happen in the state of South Australia. And it underscores the point, as the government brings this bill forward and talks about it and proclaims their support for nuclear propulsion technology in this country and provides the assurances that the government can handle all components of this program, including the proper custody and storage of that waste, just how that applies to a civilian nuclear industry as much as it does to the waste from reactors sitting in the belly of submarines. And it's the sort of maturity that we've got in this debate that we need to have in the debate around civilian nuclear power generation in this country. One of the major issues in any nuclear reactor, whether it's sitting in a submarine, whether it's producing important materials for nuclear medicine like the one we have at Lucas Heights, or other reactors that we could have as part of the energy generation mix in this country, an important component of that is the safe storage of the waste that is produced. And what this bill demonstrates, and what this debate around AUKUS demonstrates, is that we can very sensibly develop proper plans for a safe nuclear industry. This bill is combined to naval submarines, but there's no reason, if we can't do it for submarines, that we can't just as equally do it for a civilian nuclear generation industry in this country. And I note the comments being made by the government about some amendments that they've put in, talking about clarifying how, you know, this legislation can't envisage or accommodate anything on the civilian side. The fact they're bringing them forward as amendments shows how political they are rather than genuine. No one drafting this legislation in the department thought that issue needed to be addressed whatsoever, and then clearly, you know, the ministers had some questions and queries publicly along the lines of, well, you know, you're creating a framework to manage your custody of nuclear material for the naval shipbuilding program. Why in the world could it not be exactly the same for civilian power generation? And for political purposes, we see these amendments brought in to rule that out, because if it weren't for those amendments, the point is we can do it for a civilian industry as much as we can for the custody of nuclear material from the naval submarine program. So as the debate on nuclear more generally progresses, This bill is specific to naval nuclear capability, but as the broader debate progresses towards the next election, the government are in a very difficult position. They used to demonise nuclear just generally and say it was unsafe, it was dangerous, and put up ridiculous social media content predicting glow-in-the-dark animals and mushroom clouds and all the rest of it. Now, of course, they've come on board to having nuclear-powered submarines, 8 of which will be lashed to the docks at Osborne, out at Port Adelaide, in my home city. They can't justify the demonisation of the technology and the scaremongering around safety anymore because they've signed up to this AUKUS program. So now they're concocting a kind of economic argument around nuclear. So we're always happy to debate the Labor Party on anything economic, particularly when it comes to energy and electricity and the promises they've made in that area and what the reality has been since. But of course, this capability is completely transformational for the Royal Australian Navy. It's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, achievement of the Morrison government and Prime Minister Morrison's time. I think it's the one that he often himself singles out as one of his proudest achievements. It's very significant. It took a lot of complexity to negotiate access to this technology. It was also quite significant to walk back from going down the pathway of conventional submarines, but it was a decision made in the national interest of our nation. It's a fantastic capability being acquired for the Royal Australian Navy, and also I'm very proud to represent an electorate in the City of Adelaide where we will be the heart of the future nuclear submarine program.
Thank you. The question is, this bill be now read a second time? And I call the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. And can I say for the outset, whilst previous Speaker is still here, I acknowledge the work that the previous government did in negotiating the arrangements that's led to AUKUS, but thank God we had a change of government, because announcing things is one thing, but delivering, particularly delivering at the pace at which we are and the care with which we're doing it is another thing entirely. But overall, I am bipartisan in issues to do with defence, caring for our veterans, those who have served us, and getting after this challenge, this enormous national project to defend our land and our interests. The Australia, United Kingdom and United States AUKUS security partnership is committed to promoting a free, open, secure and stable Indo-Pacific region. The first major AUKUS initiative, our acquisition of conventionally armed nuclear-propelled submarines, will enhance Australia's capacity to defend itself and our national interests. With the passage of the Defence Legislation Amendment Naval Nuclear Propulsion Act 2023, the government has already taken the first major step towards establishing that legislative framework for the safe and efficient delivery of that really important capability for our nation. With the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill 2023 introduced into Parliament on 6 November 2023, the Australian Government continues with that considered, phased approach to building an enduring legislative and regulatory framework for responsible nuclear stewardship. The bill enables the establishment of a fit-for-purpose regulatory framework to ensure nuclear safety within Australia's nuclear-powered submarine enterprise and capability life cycle. And can I say from the outset how good it was to be at HMAS Stirling last week or the week before, to not only tour the USSN Hawaii, which is a Virginia-class submarine, the same as we'll be getting, but also to go aboard and talk to the captain and crew of the HMAS Collins. And I just want to, from the outset, say how good our people are. Our submarine is among the best in the world. In fact, as we start to do submarine courses in the UK and in the US, not only are we coming top 5 of the students, we've had one top a course in the UK and we've had one Australian submariner top a course in the US. That's how good our people are. And to any young Australians listening, or to their parents or to their grandparents, can I say that we need great young Australians to be getting into the submarine game, and you'll have a great career for as long as you want. This particular legislation that we're speaking to today reflects the Australian Government's recognition of the need to protect the health and safety of our people, the environment of course, from any harmful effects. Implement proper operating conditions for regulated activities, prevent accidents and mitigate the consequences of accidents should they occur, unlikely as they are. A little while ago I visited US sub-base Groton in Connecticut, had a tour of the base there, and they haven't had an incident. Kayakers just going down the river, enjoying getting out into the beautiful environment there, in the same way that they do off HMAS Stirling, and in the same way they do in Adelaide, where we'll build this fantastic capability for the future security of our nation. And so this bill is part of that legislative framework that underpins that capability and our ability to deter at a distance anyone who would seek to do any harm to Australia or our interests. The bill was introduced to Parliament alongside the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Transitional Provisions Bill 2023, which will enable the transition of any licences issued by the CEO of the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. This legislation does not in any way.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division. The proceedings will resume when the Chair of the Federation Chamber is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. I call the member for Solomon in continuation.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker, and it's good to be able to continue a contribution on the legislative framework around the nuclear-propelled submarine capacity and capability that we're delivering. And in the spirit of bipartisanship, I just want to acknowledge the member for Lindsay. Her and I are co-chairs of the Parliamentary Friends of the United States, and also acknowledge the member for Riverina's work in this important week where we've handed down the report of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, and acknowledge his work in that space in previous years. Now, I was speaking about the regulator, the new regulator that will be called the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator, ANPSA, within the defence portfolio, but independent of the defence chain of command. And that regulator will, of course, draw on the extensive experience of the United States and the United Kingdom to deliver international best practice in nuclear safety. And I was talking about sub-base Groton in Connecticut early. Indeed, for 60 years, the UK and the US have operated more than 500 nuclear naval reactors that have collectively travelled more than 240 million kilometres around our globe without a single radiological incident, and that should give that should be reassuring to Australians. UK and US nuclear-powered submarines have never experienced a reactor accident or release of radioactive material that has had an adverse effect on human health or the quality of the environment. So for decades, that proven experience offered by the UK and the US programs will support Australia in becoming a world leader in nuclear stewardship. Our AUKUS partners set the standard in nuclear safety and radiological protection of the nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. So that standard will inform our sovereign approach to nuclear safety and radiological protection, including how nuclear safety is regulated within the nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. And I spoke earlier about the deterrence effect and why this capability is so important for the future of our nations. It is important to remind ourselves what is at stake, of why we're embarking on this ambitious project for our nation. Strategically, the AUKUS partnership makes Australia safer from coercion at a distance by putting at risk long-range strike capabilities that would threaten our country in a crisis. The near unlimited range of Virginia-class and later SSN AUKUS submarines, like USN Hawaii that I visited last week in Perth, mean more time on station for our submarines than the conventional boats like the Collins class that we currently have. Collins will play an important role as we transition to nuclear-propelled capability, but the Virginia class and then the AUKUS class will be able to cover a much wider patrol area in our northern and eastern arcs for longer. And when you represent a place like Darwin, as I'm so proud to do, you realise that the Indo-Pacific contains two enormous bodies of water, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And also south of Australia, obviously, we've got the Southern Ocean. Now, the near unlimited range means that we can be anywhere and we can be on station for a lot longer. So, why is this important? Well, it puts question marks in any adversary's mind because they don't know, as I said, where we are. So deterring any potential adversary, and we always have to be prepared for that, that's our duty, that's our solemn responsibility, means that if they attempt to sever our sea lines of communication, to blockade our ports, and obviously as a trading nation that is so essential that our ports remain open, or if they try and encircle us strategically or project force against us through our northern approaches, sever our connection to, as happened in World War II, if an adversary tries to sever our connection to continental US, then this capability becomes oh so important. All such aggressive courses of action would be much more likely to fail with our nuclear-propelled submarines lurking within striking distance. An adversary would be much less likely to be tempted to use them against us in a war. The odds would be stacked a lot higher against them. Their ships would be vulnerable to being sunk while they stage for any assault or any attempt to cut us off. Their submarines liable to being stalked and destroyed by the best submariners in the world. Their forces couldn't sail towards Australia free of fear that they might be next to go to the bottom of one of those oceans. All Australian warships, including our submarines, are Australian sovereign assets. This point of sovereignty is another one that people having a go at AUKUS like to puppet. Our sovereign assets, our submarines, like our warships, will be commanded by Australian officers and under the sovereign control of the Australian government. We alone, the Australian government alone, will determine the deployment of our armed forces on conditions of our choosing, obviously in close cooperation with our allies and partners. And this Parliament alone will provide the budgetary and legislative oversight, as we're beginning with this legislation, that will oversight Australia's use of force. AUKUS submarines are undoubtedly trilateral in origin, initially made in the UK. This is the SSN AUKUS, with British and US technology, a collaboration with our great partners and allies. And let us be clear, Deputy Speaker, we could not be doing this and having this awesome capability without our partners. But, as I said, it will be a sovereign capability, built and directed by Australians. This bill advances that great project. Now, I think it's important also for those listening to appreciate and understand that this collaboration is not new. For decades, we've had Australian submariners on UK boats. For decades, we've had Australian submariners on US boats and vice versa. Even on the Collins submarine, our current capability, which is a deterrent, just not as good a deterrent for the reasons I outlined earlier, we have the same weapon system, the same weapon operating system, conventional weapons, but the same. So we are going to be able to transition this capability. We are going to be able to build this sovereign capability in the future in Adelaide as well. And that will be a great thing for our nation. And I'm sure that working together across the Parliament, we can get the facts out there about AUKUS, about how important it is to the future of our nation in the best interests of the Australian people. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and at the outset I will acknowledge the member for Solomon's service to our nation. I'll thank him for most of the content of his speech, and he, like me, wants our nation to be the most secure it can be. He, like me, wants the very best in capability, the very best in defence personnel. And whilst he was in uniform, he was one of those who was the very best our nation could offer to be prepared to go and fight, if necessary, for our nation. Again, I thank you, Member for Solomon, for your words. The price of peace, as has often been said, is eternal vigilance. And this legislation, the entire AUKUS framework, is based on being well prepared, is based on being ever vigilant. As I speak, we have Greens Party members throwing manure at police horses in Melbourne. Now, the Greens want horse racing stopped, and just bear with me, this is relevant. The Greens want horse racing stopped in Melbourne, which is the home of the world's greatest horse race, handicap race, the Melbourne Cup. And yet they are at an anti-war, anti-Israel protest at the moment, pro-Hamas throwing manure at police horses, and that is a disgrace. And in a moment we're going to hear from a couple of Greens on this particular bill. Now, if the defence of this nation, the security of Australia is left to the Greens, then God help us. God help us. Because what we see from the Greens' antics in the House of Representatives and the Senate, what we see at protests not just in Melbourne, not just in our capital cities, but indeed in regional centres right throughout Australia, including my hometown of Wagga Wagga at the moment, is nothing short of abhorrent. And I truly worry if we are left after the next election with a government which has to rely on Green votes to get legislation passed. And so it's good that we're passing this legislation today or in the not too distant future, because when it comes to ensuring that national security is, as it always should be, the number one priority of a government, then there are a lot of commonalities between Labor and the coalition. Australia is an island nation. We are surrounded by water, and ensuring the safety and security of our coastline, of our nation, is going to be underpinned by our nuclear naval capability. And the Nuclear Power Safety Bill is integral in ensuring that we have the right fleet, the right personnel, the right build going forward to ensure that we meet our commitments to keep Australian people's safety as our number one priority. Now, this is a legacy of Scott Morrison, it is, and when he met in the margins of the G7 summit in Carbis Bay, it was June 12, 2021. I was the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, and I'm very proud to say that this had been months in the making. The AUKUS arrangements, the agreements that we have entered into with the United States of America, with the United Kingdom, were vital to our nation, not just in the here and now, but for decades going forward. And I want to commend former Prime Minister Morrison for the work he did, the negotiations he managed, and the ability to achieve this historic deal. Prime Minister Morrison and President Joe Biden discussed a number of issues of mutual concern, including the Indo-Pacific region. And having been fortunate enough to go to the Australia-America dialogue at the after being requested to do so, or asked to do so, invited to do so indeed, by former Speaker Tony Smith. And when we had the briefings with the US at those particular meetings, the need to have a good Navy presence in the Indo-Pacific became even more apparent. Now, President Biden and Prime Minister Morrison agreed that the strategic context in the Indo-Pacific was changing, and it is. It's very much altering, and that there was a strong rationale for deepening strategic cooperation between the three governments, UK, US and Australia. Of course, they welcomed at the time the forthcoming visits and exercises in the Indo-Pacific by the Carrier Strike Group led by HMS Queen Elizabeth. And what our Navy does, indeed what our Australian Army and Royal Australian Air Force do as well, they have the very best training exercises, and they do a lot of those over the top end, in northern Queensland, Northern Territory, and the presence of in Darwin of our people, our ADF personnel, mixed with the finest American Marines, is quite integral and important to our future defence operations. Speed is of the essence with the Australian Nuclear Safety power bill and the transition and making sure that we get on and build the subs. We support this bill. Coalition agrees with this bill, and obviously it will follow with Senate scrutiny because it's vital to our long-term defence capability and security of Australians. It's in the best interests of our nation that AUKUS succeeds. It's in the best interests of our nation that the Greens do not succeed, because they are bringing to this parliament and to our nation a change in the social fabric of society. They want to tear down all those traditions that we are quite frankly proud of. I worry, even in Wagga Wagga, we've got a local government election this Saturday. The Greens are already on the council. They've had a deputy mayor in recent times. And Wagga Wagga is a garrison city. We have the home of the soldier, Kapooka, Blamey Barracks, 1st Recruit Training Battalion. If you are joining the army as a recruit, you do your training at Kapooka, at Wagga Wagga. If you spend any given time in the Royal Australian Air Force, you will end up, more than likely, at RAF Base Wagga Wagga. And indeed, connected to and a vital part of RAF Wagga is a Navy presence. Dozens upon dozens of naval personnel in Wagga Wagga. Very much landlocked, long, long way from the nearest drop of seawater, but we're very proud of having those Navy people. They are the best and the bravest and the finest that the Navy produces often end up at Wagga Wagga as well. And I'm also very proud that when we were in government and I was the Deputy Prime Minister, indeed in previous portfolio areas I was a Veterans Affairs Minister and I was also Assistant Minister of Defence before that Wagga Wagga secured $561.9 million for upgrades, vital upgrades to RAF Wagga to ensure that it had accommodation that was fit for purpose for 2024, let alone beyond. They were living in quarters that were built in the 1950s, and $846.8 million for Kapooka for vital upgrades for the Army base. I say that in the context that we need to be prepared not just on the coastline, but indeed right throughout our strategic training bases, right throughout our military presence in Australia. Now, I won't read all of this, but if people want to look at it, they can go on the Lowy Institute website and read in full. I will selectively quote some of the lines from Sam Rugevin's article where he was referring in 2022, 12 September, to AUKUS 1 year on, talking about how details were needed, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. Some lines in the article where he was talking about how this was brought about very hastily. Well, it needed to be. You can't have a multi-pronged tripartite defence agreement and let the, and just have a national discussion about the pros and cons of that, because once the Greens started talking about it, nothing would ever get done. Sometimes these do need to happen behind closed doors and then work towards a sensible outcome for the nation. But in the article, he talks about, and I'll quote it, on 15 September 2021, Prime Minister Scott Morrison joined his British counterpart Boris Johnson and US President Joe Biden to announce AUKUS. In so doing, Morrison set Australia's foreign and defence policies on a profoundly new course, a course now firmly embraced by the new Labor government led by Anthony Albanese. Now, he continues, if the submarines are all delivered, Australia will join the high table of the world's military powers. I think that's a good thing. He didn't write that, I'm saying that. Nuclear-powered submarines are the apex predators of naval warfare, and Australia is proposing to acquire at least 8, more than the UK and France now have or plan to have. Nuclear power gives these submarines almost infinite range and endurance, and they will carry missiles that can strike targets thousands of kilometres inland. For the first time in its history, Australia will have global strike capability. Nothing wrong with that. Above all, he writes, AUKUS is a profound step because of what it says about the Australian government's attitude to the US alliance. I'd almost say nothing wrong with that either. I would say that, in fact. He refers to AUKUS being a big bet on America. Well, you know, at the end of the day, I was once told that a definition of a friend is someone who has the same enemies you have. And whilst I'm not going to detail any enemies that we do have, but we do need to be prepared. We do need to be strike ready. We do need to have not just personnel committed to going into battle if need be, and I hope that's not the case, but we need to also have the weaponry and the equipment and the capability if the need arises. And to be able to do that, we need to have a very, very good submarine fleet, given the fact that we are an island nation, given the fact that we are in a volatile geopolitical Indo-Pacific region. And things are changing, and they are changing fast. Australia's target date for achieving the Sovereign Ready milestone is the early 2030s. US and UK nuclear submarines will be forward rotating through HMAS Sterling in Western Australia from 2027, and we will want to have our people upskilled and our facilities upgraded by that time. We don't have a day to waste. We do not. Australia has to prove to the US and the UK we are a reliable partner. I think we've done that in world wars past. We've done that through our rotations with the US and the UK in recent conflicts. And I can recall, and I was there with the member for McEwen actually at Camp Baird, where we both heard, particularly from the US, how proud they were to serve alongside Australians, how infinitely more secure they felt when they were fighting alongside Australians than anyone else in the world. And the member for McEwen, I see him nodding. We were both, I know we were very proud of the level of commitment our troops gave, but certainly the level of safety and security that others felt in our troops. Now, we won't let the US or the UK down. We are making a huge investment, and when the government talks about a Made in Australia manufacturing initiative going forward, this lies at the very heart of making sure that we do very much use Australian capability and know-how, obviously in line with the AUKUS arrangements, to upskill our people. And I heard the member for Solomon talking about the wonderful job opportunities that were going to be made available because of this. So this is a proud Australia moment, it's a Team Australia moment, and it's also a great legacy of former Prime Minister Scott Morrison. I recommend the bill to the House.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for McEwen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to speak on the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Bill. This bill is essential for us to fully implement our AUKUS deal, which is in turn essential for the future security of our country and making sure we are ready for any threats to our borders. AUKUS will also bring thousands of jobs for working Australians, with an influx of ongoing defence industry and research opportunities to our shores. But to fully realise the opportunities that an agreement like AUKUS can give to all Australians, a bill like this is needed to set the regulations and framework for the industry to operate safely. The bill at its heart is the next stepping stone for creating a sovereign industry and workforce to deliver conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. This industrial endeavour that AUKUS agreement brings to our nation is one of the greatest that has been attempted by Australia, due to the scale of this project and the obvious technical complexity of nuclear submarines. Building submarines in Australia requires a truly whole-of-nation effort, but it's an effort that is filled with opportunities. The project to build Australia's SSN AUKUS submarines is anticipated to create around 20,000 direct jobs and see some $30 billion invested in Australia's industrial base. including infrastructure upgrades and its expansion, amounting to up to $18 billion over the next 3 decades. The project will transform our skills, productivity, industrial capacity, and the science and research capabilities. The overall notion, industrial workforce supporting the construction and sustainment of submarines, is projected to be in the range of 6,500 to 8,000 jobs. Building this workforce will be a priority for the coming decades. Our fleet will be serviced, maintained and upgraded by Australian workers. Made in Australia for the safety of all Australians. The implementation of this bill is an important step for Australia to meet the milestones agreed with our closest allies, the United Kingdom and the United States. Here we show our commitment to not only our allies but also to our Pacific family, in that Australia is committed to maintain the highest level of nuclear safety across the life cycle of our nuclear-powered submarines. The Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill will ensure that we do apply the highest standards for the submarines enterprises for our country. As we go into the bill, I want to address some of the concerns people have raised about the subject of this bill, specifically around the disposal of nuclear waste. This bill is instrumental in creating a proper nuclear waste disposal plan. For Australian submarines, we don't expect the requirement to manage high-level radioactive waste until the 2050s, when our nuclear-powered submarines are defueled at the end of their life cycle. The waste will be stored and disposed of in the current or future defence estate. The government will announce the process by which it selects the location in due course. Of course, Australia already does produce some nuclear waste. With the development of nuclear submarines, the government is working through the plan to hold the nuclear waste being developed at a national level. However, to be absolutely clear, it will only be for our domestically produced waste. We will not be, as some have suggested, a dumping ground for nuclear waste for other countries. And it's important that we put that scare campaign to bed very quickly and very clearly. Indeed, to put the matter beyond the doubt, the government intends to amend the bill to make it clear that nothing in the bill authorises the storage or disposal of spent nuclear fuel from UK or US submarines. Creating advanced manufacturing is important, and we know the risks that come with having a nuclear-based industry. So what is the purpose of the bills before us? The first bill sets out clear obligations for those involved in the nuclear-powered submarines enterprise. This includes nuclear safety duties and licensing requirements for persons conducting regulated activities and civil and criminal consequences if contravened. It will also establish a new independent statutory regulator. The regulator will operate within the defence portfolio but independent of the chain of command. Along with the regulator, it will establish a dedicated nuclear framework. It will regulate nuclear safety across the nuclear-powered submarine enterprise and capability life cycle for the nuclear aspects of the submarine platform. The transitional bill that accompanies this bill enables the transition of any relevant licences issued by the CEO of ARPANZA to the regulated activities under the bill. The Albanese Labor government is committed to ensuring the bill establishes a robust, effective regulatory framework to maintain the highest standards for safety. Those listening may know the bill has been delayed slightly due to a referral to the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee. But now the committee has published its report and made 8 recommendations and ultimately recommended the bill be passed. The government has accepted either in full or in principle all the recommendations from the committee and will make amendments to the bill to address these. We're keen to make sure that we work collaborative on such technical bills and issues when it comes to building the framework that will underpin national security. The government is happy to address the issues raised by the committee, clarifying that the bill does not authorise the establishment of facilities for the purposes of civil nuclear power, the enrichment of uranium or the reprocessing of nuclear material. 2, establishing a requirement that a person must not be appointed as or remain the Director General or the Deputy Director General of the regulator if they have served at any time in the previous 12 months as a member of the ADF or as a staff member of Defence or Australian Submarine Agency. Establishing a ministerial advisory committee to ensure the minister has independent advice relating to the regulator, including its independence and its effectiveness of the operation of the Act. Allowing for the Minister of Defence to share reports from the DG with the Ministers for Health and the Ministers for Industry and Science, as the Ministers responsible for ARPANZA and ANSTO, respectively, to provide greater sharing of information and an application of nuclear safety best practices. Adding additional penalties for obstructing, hindering or intimidating a member of the regulator to further strengthen the regulator's powers and their independence. Further, the government is looking to extend the commencement of the bill from 6 to 12 months to ensure the regulatory changes are fully communicated and implemented in an orderly fashion. All of this will strengthen the bill and ensure the highest standard of nuclear safety within Australia's conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. The bill will provide the framework which the newly established regulator can undertake their role. It also specifies the nuclear safety duties applicable across the enterprise and the very significant penalties that apply for contraventions to ensure that the industry is clean from any corrupt or adverse actors. The regulator will also have the power to determine the policies, processes and practices required to undertake its functions. Through this bill, Australia is ultimately upholding our international legal obligations, especially the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Due to the nature of these machines, nuclear submarines will provide greater longevity and breadth to our defence forces. However, and I say this again to be clear, these submarines will only hold conventional weapons. The nuclear part of the submarine, of nuclear submarines, is the energy source that keeps them running. The legislation is explicit that the regulator must have regard to Australia's international obligations in performing its functions. There will be no changes needed to be made to Australia's Nuclear Non-Proliferation Safeguards Act 1987, which primarily implements those obligations. Indeed, Labor will uphold its proud history of championing practical disarmament efforts and its commitment to high non-proliferation standards and its enduring dedication in a world without nuclear weapons. This is also reflective in the current understanding of international best practice. I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that we are following our partners in AUKUS who have been operating over 500 naval nuclear reactors over the course of 60 years without major incidents. These naval nuclear submarines pose no threat to the environment and is backed up with decades of proven experience offered by the UK and the US. Further, we'll be working closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure Australia becomes a world-leading custodian of nuclear waste and to make sure its best practice nuclear safety is being followed. The government will ensure Australia is responsible nuclear steward and maintains the highest level of safety in respect of the nuclear-powered submarines. We are committed to ensuring the management of radioactive waste and spent nuclear fuel responsibly, including through an appropriately independent regulatory system. The rigorous processes that will determine the site of the nuclear waste facility on current or future defence estate with the appropriate public consultation, agreement with First Nations communities to respect and protect cultural heritage. So to be clear, again, Australia will not be responsible for disposing spent nuclear fuel or accept other high-level radioactive waste from any other country. Having a strong naval nuclear defence framework will only strengthen our defence force and, in turn, Australia's security position and outcomes in the region. We all can acknowledge that we are living in fraught and ever-changing times filled with uncertainty. The bill helps us fulfil the goal of achieving stronger national security. We know that any untoward threats to our borders will come from sea. By pursuing this policy, we're enhancing Australia's national security goals, but not compromising on any previous agreements. Our defence policy is founded on the principles of Australian sovereignty and self-reliance. This bill is just a step in building Australia's military defence capability, especially as we look to play our part in a collective deterrence of aggression. By having a strong defence capabilities of our own and working with partners investing in their capabilities, we change the calculus for any potential aggressor. To conclude, as I said in the beginning, this bill is the next step to fully implement the long-anticipated AUKUS deal, a deal that will make our country safer and our borders stronger. Australia's interests lie in the shaping of a region that is peaceful, stable and prosperous. But as countries become more aggressive or seek to exert more coercive influence, there must be a counterweight to not only balance out the regional power but also to solidify Australia's position. The bill protects Australia's interests. It dots the I's, crosses the T's in making sure our naval nuclear industry is safe. And that creates a better and safer future for all Australians.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I'm proud to rise in support of these bills, and there are many times when we will have disagreements with the government and seek to hold them to account, but they do deserve credit for their commitment to AUKUS, because AUKUS is one of those nation-changing projects that will only survive if the key requirements of bipartisanship are there. And that's not just bipartisanship in motherhood statements, but it's in actually seeing it through. Full credit to the previous government and the previous Prime Minister for his leadership in negotiating this trilateral partnership, which has multiple pillars. And full credit to the security agencies and then those from DFAT and Defence who negotiated that agreement and led the way. It was an example of Australia taking a leadership role in the world. And too often we downplay our own role in the world, but that is a credit to the previous Prime Minister and the previous government. But that's the easy part. The hard part is in seeing it delivered. And we know from conventional non-defence and defence projects that projects are often killed by middle management, by cost blowouts, by other priorities, or a lack of commitment. And you can foresee that the delivery of AUKUS over that time frame, over that cost, and over that level of complexity, because nuclear submarines are the equivalent that we have for spaceships. They have the most cutting-edge, difficult engineering and technological challenges you could possibly imagine. So there will be many reasons to delay, to block, and to avoid, many reasons. And they are political, they are technological, they're often driven by personnel. So it is important that we all lean in at every stage to make sure that this project is driven forward in the national interest. But can I speak, Deputy Speaker, about the purpose of AUKUS? There are many commentators who, mostly from other nations not part of the trilateral agreement, who see AUKUS as an aggressive act. It's anything but. It's about deterrence. And I'd like to briefly talk about what deterrence means. AUKUS and the submarines and the other Pillar 2 technologies are not there built to fight a certain war. They're built to prevent future war. And before any conflict in human history has ever been started, there was a point when the key decision makers decided whether it was worth it and worth it today. And that process is called a war game. And a war game can be formalised or it can be informal. But there is a point where a decision maker says, is this in my national interest? Can I win? And the purpose of deterrence is that in that war game, the answer is this: not today. Not today. And our task is to make sure that potential aggressors in the globe wake up and say, not today. And one of the reasons they'll say not today is because of AUKUS. That's important. So its whole purpose is to create a more peaceful world. Its whole purpose is about that. And that should never be forgotten. The other thing in terms of the delivery, Deputy Speaker, is the role for us as parliamentarians. When you have 3 nations in a trilateral agreement, all of those challenges that I spoke about, from middle management, cost blowouts, technological challenges, you name it, it will be there. They're all multiplied by 3. They're all multiplied by 3. So the role of us here in the Parliament is to reach out and have relationships with our allies in the other parliaments, in Congress and in the United Kingdom. And that's where the friendship organisations are important, the trips through embassies are very important. Because, of course, we have our role to play in seeing this move forward, but we must also make sure that we are in constant dialogue with our partners so that that is reinforced in their nations. And right now, Deputy Speaker, on my phone, it's on silent, but there is the US presidential debate. And that is a great moment in their democracy, and they will make a decision in November. And whoever is elected, whether it's a President Harris or a President Trump, it's in our interest that either regime and either administration knows that there is a friend that is reliable here in Australia. And at some stage we'll go through our own election, Deputy Speaker. And so for this project to survive, it must survive the twists and turns of 3 democracies. And so far it's doing that. So far it's doing that. We had a United Kingdom election and there's a full commitment on the new Labor administration. And we must lean in to make sure that the new presidential administration in the US is just as committed, along with members of Congress. So to the mechanics of the bills that are before us, they're quite dry. They're about setting up a regulatory regime. But this is important. Where you have the introduction of advanced technology such as this, it is important that we have the regulatory instruments set up, and we have those bodies set up ready to make sure that we do it in compliance with our domestic laws, international treaty obligations, and the terms of the AUKUS agreement itself. Deputy Speaker, can I single out the Senate in its role as a House of Review in the report that they delivered on this provision? I think that is always a helpful process, and particularly in complex bills like this that have consequences that the House may not get to deliver. Their report was excellent, and it had a number of recommendations which I understand have been considered and have been accepted. So in conclusion, Deputy Speaker, it is important that we support this bill, but that we are on all sides of the chamber ever vigilant on making sure that AUKUS is delivered on time and in the national interest. And in that respect, it is in the national interest of 3 nations. That is essential for it to be delivered for all Australians, which we are committed to.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill 2023 and the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Transitional Provisions Bill 2023. The Australia, United Kingdom and the United States of America, or AUKUS Security Partnership, through this there's a commitment by all 3 countries to a free, open, secure and stable Indo-Pacific. The first major AUKUS initiative, Australia's acquisition of conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, will enhance our capacity as a country to defend ourselves around our territorial waters and our national interests beyond. The AUKUS nuclear power submarine pathway will deliver long-term strategic benefits to all 3 countries. It strengthens the combined industrial capacity of all 3 nations, with increased cooperation making trilateral supply chains more robust and resilient. This bill is the second legislative step in support of Australia's acquisition of these submarines. It builds on the Defence Legislation Amendment Naval Nuclear Propulsion Bill, which was introduced in May and commenced in July last year. Following the passage of that bill in August last year, the Australian Labor Party National Conference, held in Brisbane, of which I was a delegate, adopted a statement in detail explaining why we are acquiring conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. We recognise that deciding to acquire these submarines is a hard choice, but a clear one. The Collins-class submarines we currently operate have a potent capability but diesel-electric submarines become increasingly detectable, and it will so in the future. And so we want to make sure we have a leading-edge capability. We need simply to take the step of nuclear propulsion. The statement by the conference in detail explained how the Labor government will go about acquiring conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. For example, it says, "We will ensure that Australian workers will benefit from massive investments in industry, infrastructure and common user facilities. We will ensure Australia continues to meet all its non-proliferation obligations and commitments under international law. We will maintain Australia's long-standing position on not possessing or seeking to acquire nuclear weapons. And we will ensure Australia is a responsible nuclear steward and maintains the highest level of nuclear safety in respect of nuclear-powered submarines." As a delegate, I supported that particular motion and statement and continue to do so today. This bill, in particular, is specifically focused on ensuring Australia maintains the highest level of nuclear safety in respect of nuclear-powered submarines. It will enable the establishment of new regulatory framework, including an independent regulator to ensure nuclear safety within Australia's nuclear-powered submarine enterprise and capability life cycle. The new framework will harmonise with other schemes, including workplace health and safety, nuclear non-proliferation and civilian nuclear safety. The bill previously established, this bill will establish, by the way, this new independent statutory regulator, the Australian Nuclear-Powered Submarine Safety Regulator, to ensure we apply the highest standards of nuclear safety across our nuclear-powered submarine enterprise and continue to implement the AUKUS agreement. This is the second legislative package introduced to support the pathway of AUKUS. The new regulator will provide functions and powers necessary to regulate the unique circumstances associated with nuclear safety and also protection across the life cycle of Australia's nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. It includes associated infrastructure and facilities. The regulator will be independent of Australia's Defence Force chain of command and directions from the Department of Defence. It's a fundamental system of regulation to be independent. It will work with submariners, it will work with the safety of submariners, it will work with Australian communities and international communities and the environmental authorities as well. The regulator will have a non-corporate Commonwealth entity within the defence portfolio and report directly to the Department of Defence, rather the Minister of Defence, rather. The legislation also established a fit-for-purpose regulatory framework imposing strict nuclear safety duties and licensing requirements for activities related to nuclear-powered submarines. The legislation is reflective of the government's commitment in terms of workplace health and safety, also dealing with environmental issues and the harmful effect of radiation, preventing accidents, mitigating the consequence of accidents, implementing proper operating conditions for regulatory activities. In particular, the bill establishes some nuclear safety duties to apply to conducting regulated activities, create a licensing scheme for persons who conduct activities in relation to naval nuclear power activities, establishes this new regulator, the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator, which has some inspectors associated with it. There'll be monitoring and compliance powers, offences and civil penalty provisions, some clarification of certain Commonwealth state and territory laws. Enables the transition of any licences, by the way, issued by PANZA to the regulator, where they correspond to the regulated activities under the bill before the Chamber. The bill ensures any licences issued by PANZA are in accordance with the legislation governing it to be treated as Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety licences for the purpose of the legislation before the House. It's consistent with the first tranche of AUKUS-related legislation that passed the Parliament previously. The moratorium, by the way, on civil nuclear power in Australia has been a feature of our law since the Howard government enacted the Australian Radiation Protection Nuclear Safety Act and the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act in the late 1990s. This robust and comprehensive approach to regulating Australia's nuclear-powered submarine program recognises our commitment to nuclear stewardship and upholding the highest standards of safety and security. The new regulator will have access to relevant expertise and experience and also deal with their international partners. The legislation is an important step in ensuring we have nuclear safety and protection across the life cycle of this historic capability. We're delivering on this commitment. It's the single biggest investment in our defence capability in our history, and the establishment of the regulator is a critical element in this game-changing capability. It'll be a specialised and dedicated regulator, as I said. Deputy Speaker, we're getting on with the job and making good progress when it comes to bedding down the AUKUS partnership. And it's supported by both sides of politics and supported by our partners. In discussions I've had with US and UK politicians here in Australia and overseas, there is a bipartisan commitment. And for example, there's been a change of government in the UK. Conservative politicians I spoke to and Labor politicians I spoke to, then in opposition, both indicated to me in discussions I had that they supported AUKUS and strongly did so, whether in the Palace of Westminster or indeed in Edinburgh, where I visited. AUKUS partners will have now signed an agreement that's essential, by the way, to Australia's capability to safely build, operate and maintain this conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine capacity. This enables the UK and the US to transfer these technologies, items and equipment for Australia's future nuclear-powered submarines. And our allies have done this in the past. I witnessed, for example, in my electorate, the Growler technology that the US has provided our planes based in Amberley in my electorate. That's the benefit of having these relationships with our strong allies like the UK and the US. There will be continued trilateral communication, exchange of information to nuclear-powered submarines among our partners. It's critical for us to have a sovereign nuclear-powered submarine capacity from 2030s, with the transfer of the Virginia-class submarines from the US to Australia and the building of Australia's SSN AUKUS submarines in Adelaide. It's consistent with our commitment with the other partners to make sure we maintain the highest standards of safety, security and non-proliferation. It's a useful reminder that while most attention is focused on the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines, AUKUS is much broader than that. It's an effective technology-sharing partnership between three allies. Complementing this, Australia, the UK and the United States have recently finalised the establishment of an export licence, export-free trade agreement, an export licence-free trade agreement. That's an environment, by the way, that creates reform, provides reciprocal national exemptions from our respective export control frameworks, unlocking billions of dollars of investment and cutting red tape for Australian industry and our AUKUS partners. As of this month, AUKUS partners, industry, higher education and research sectors will now be able to export most military and dual-use goods, technology and services without requiring a licence. It demonstrates the Labor government's commitment and our AUKUS partners' commitment to delivering on a collective commitment to streamline defence trade and accelerate collaboration on asymmetric capabilities. And last, when it comes to significant employment benefits that will flow from the AUKUS partnership, the Albanese government has just announced we will deliver a new exclusive Jobs for Subs training program for more than 200 young West Australians to work in the AUKUS submarine program. This new nuclear-powered submarine graduate apprenticeship and training initiative is an incredible opportunity for young people. These workers will work on nuclear-powered submarine program, in particular on the Submarine Rotational Force West, based on HMAS Stirling in Western Australia. As part of this, they'll receive training across high-priority disciplines and essential trades including span, fabrication and machining, engineering and project management and supply chain operations and qualifications. This is delivering hundreds of jobs. It will build the workforce we need to sustain and maintain these submarines. Deputy Speaker, in closing, the acquisition of these submarines through the AUKUS partnership is the biggest single investment in Australia's defence capability in our history. It strengthens our national security. It contributes to regional stability in response to unprecedented strategic challenges. It builds a future made in Australia by Australians with record investments in defence, skills, jobs and infrastructure. It will deliver a superior capability, ensure there is no capability gap after a decade of inaction and mismanagement by those opposite. As part of this, we'll need a sophisticated security and safety architecture around the nuclear-powered submarine program, and that's what this legislation is all about. I want to acknowledge the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence for bringing forward these important measures to ensure the safety of the submarine program. This is a responsible and necessary step to ensure delivery of the submarines and the safety and security of Australians, and builds on the legal architecture to support this endeavour to ensure further tranches of legislation, and this work will extend beyond the life of this parliament. We will continue to adopt a methodical, phased approach to building our capacity as a nation to safely and securely build, maintain and operate conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. In doing this, we'll make all Australians safer. I commend the bill.
The question is that this bill now be read a second time, and I call Member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill 2023 and its associated Transitional Provisions Bill. And Deputy Speaker, this bill represents the latest of the many legislative reforms required to implement the AUKUS security arrangements between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States. And this legislation is supported by the Coalition, but I do just have to take issue, Deputy Speaker, with one thing that the member for Blair just said. I was just in the chamber when he said this, and he said that there has been a decade of inaction by the Coalition government on defence issues. I find that a very difficult statement to comprehend in light of the fact it was the Coalition, was the former Coalition government that did initially sign the government up to the AUKUS arrangement. So I do commend the federal government for continuing the work that was initiated by the former Coalition government on the AUKUS partnership for the defence and national security of Australia. And Deputy Speaker, it's important where we are located within the world, down in the South Pacific, in that we do have this very important trilateral arrangement with both the United Kingdom and the United States. We have very strong ties, both historically, militarily, with both of these nations. They are important friends. They have been in the past, and this arrangement, the fact that both the United Kingdom government and also the United States government signed up to this arrangement, shows the high regard in which they both view Australia, and similarly the high regard in which we view our relationship with both of their countries. And it's also important, Deputy Speaker, in the times in which we live, that the United Kingdom and also the United States are, like Australia, two very important democracies, and it is therefore equally, that is, I think, a very important point to make in the context of this arrangement. And this arrangement, when it was put into place, when it was signed, it was said that it was done to ensure the future defence and national security of Australia. And Deputy Speaker, we know that a government's most important priority is the safety and security of its citizens. That if we look back to the history of the AUKUS arrangement, it was announced in September 2021 to promote, and I quote, a free and open Indo-Pacific that is secure and stable. And in the joint statement that was released by Australia, the United States of America and the United Kingdom in March last year, it was said, and I quote, for more than a century, our three nations have stood shoulder to shoulder along with other allies and partners to help sustain peace, stability and prosperity around the world, including in the Indo-Pacific. We believe in a world that protects freedoms and respects human rights, the rule of law, the independence of sovereign states and the rule-based international order. The steps we are announcing today will help us to advance these mutually beneficial objectives in the decades to come. So, Deputy Speaker, the first major initiative of AUKUS was a historic trilateral decision to support Australia acquiring conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines. This involves the manufacture of at least 3, maybe 5 nuclear-powered submarines, and these are to be built in Adelaide. And I particularly commend this as it will enhance and build upon the nuclear technology that Australia has already developed for many years in our country, and I'm very proud to say that in my electorate I have a nuclear reactor which has enabled many technological advancements to be made in nuclear medicine, and I think it is very important now that we'll be harnessing nuclear technology for our future defence capabilities. And when it was outlined, the AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine pathway, I'll just take this place briefly through that. Particularly in relation to this legislation, it said Australia must be sovereign ready before it can operate a nuclear-powered submarine. And what this means, Deputy Speaker, is that Australia must achieve the capacity to be the sovereign owner, operator, maintainer and regulator of this very important capability. But there are, of course, a series of steps that will need to be taken, primarily through the next decade, and that will be taken with the support of the United States and the United Kingdom to achieve this capability as soon as possible. Deputy Speaker, it is most certainly in the best interests of our nation that we see AUKUS succeed, and as part of the coalition, I am committed to moving forward and seeing this through to its completion. So this, Australia set a target date for achieving the sovereign ready milestone in the early 2030s. Therefore, speed on this legislation is important. And in that regard, I do note that in March of last year, the Prime Minister Albanese jointly announced with our counterparts, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the UK President Joe Biden, they identified an identified pathway for Australia to acquire the submarines at the earliest possible date. And that pathway I'll now set out. In 2023, Australian military and civilian personnel embedded in the UK and US nuclear-powered submarines program started increased visits by the US nuclear-powered submarines to the HMS AS Sterling in Western Australia. From 2022, we saw the commencement of Australian shipyard design and construction. In the late 2020s, it's proposed that there will be construction of AUKUS nuclear-powered submarines will commence. From 2026, UK nuclear-powered submarines will commence regular visits to the HMAS Sterling. From 2027 to 2032, the Submarine Rotational Force West will commence, and it will involve 1 Royal Navy and up to 4 US Navy nuclear-powered submarines conducting rotations from the HMAS Sterling. So you'll see that there is very much trilateral support for this, not just having been signed in a document, but also on the ground from our, and we'll be utilising the expertise that has been developed by our UK and US friends. So, and these bills are a very important step in the giant leap that we must now take towards becoming a nation that can operate nuclear submarines. So I'll just turn briefly to the particulars of the legislation, Deputy Speaker. It essentially enables or establishes a new regulator, the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator, and that regulator would be able to grant Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety licences to Commonwealth-related persons for a series of regulated activities in designated zones. The regulator will have a series of compliance and enforcement powers, and it will sit within the Department of Defence, which is appropriate. I note that the Greens have some issue with that, but I think that the Greens should listen to the two major parties on anything defence related. And also the Minister of Defence will be able to give the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator directions as was necessary in the interests of national security and in the event of an emergency. And the regulator will broadly be responsible for 3 main areas. It'll be granting the nuclear power safety licences. It'll be responsible for monitoring and enforcing compliance with nuclear safety duties, and it will also be responsible for promoting nuclear safety of AUKUS submarine-related activities. So these are all roles, Deputy Speaker, that are entirely appropriate when we are moving into a new world as we are, and it is very important that this is done by an appropriate regulator. And so, Deputy Speaker, to conclude, this is very important legislation. It builds on an important relationship for Australia. It recognises that the UK and the US have important capabilities that both of those countries have developed, and those countries are interested and very supportive of Australia also building its capacity with nuclear-powered submarines. It reinforces the importance of our strategic relationship with both the United States and the United Kingdom, and builds on the friendship that our three countries have developed over centuries, Deputy Speaker. So for all of those reasons, I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call a member for Adelaide.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise and speak on this bill, the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Bill 2023. This government, Deputy Speaker, is taking the next important step with this bill towards acquiring Australia's own conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, which also reflects on our commitment to best practice safety standards. It reflects on our commitment to that stewardship. And we know that Australia is facing some of the most challenging strategic circumstances since the Second World War. And it's why the government is making record investments, Deputy Speaker, in defence to keep Australians safe, which is one of the most crucial roles of any government of any persuasion. We also know that keeping Australia safe is, as I said, one of the most crucial roles. But at the same time, within the AUKUS agreement and the building of submarines, especially in my home state of South Australia, is very important for job creation. And I know in Perth as well. So we'll see the creation of new technologies, new industries and jobs which are very important to the economy and to my home state and to the nation. But as I said, Australia faces one of the most challenging times since the Second World War. So what we're doing is ensuring that central to the government's commitment to delivering Australia's first conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines, this bill is going to establish a new regulatory framework to ensure nuclear safety across Australia's nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. And some of the things that we'll do are as follows, Deputy Speaker. It will establish a dedicated fit-for-purpose nuclear safety framework to support Australia's nuclear-powered submarines and related facilities. And it sets out clear nuclear safety obligations for personal involvement in nuclear-powered submarines and related facilities. And it will be done through a licensing regime for persons conducting regulated activities with serious civil and serious criminal consequences if there is a breach of law. It establishes a new independent statutory regulator, and that will be the Australian Naval Nuclear Power Safety Regulator with a defence within, which will sit within the defence portfolio, independent of the defence chain of command, and empower the regulator to operate within a system of regulation alongside domestic agencies and, where appropriate, to collaborate with our defence partners, our US and UK partners, of course. The Transitional Provisions Bill will allow any of the relevant licences issued by the CEO of the Australian Radiation Protection Nuclear Safety Agency to transition to the new regulatory system where they would authorise regulated activities under this new legislation. So that gives you a bit of a background, but Deputy Speaker, as I said, the government is absolutely committed to ensuring the bill establishes a very robust, very effective regulatory framework to maintain that highest standards of nuclear safety that the Australian public deserve. And the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence introduced these bills back in November 2023, and they were referred to the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee on May 2024. The committee published this report and made the recommendations and ultimately recommended the bill be passed. So it's gone through the process. It's gone through the process of the inquiry and committees, and the recommendation is the bill be passed. The government has accepted either in full or in principle all of the recommendations, as we've heard from the Minister, and of the Senate Committee, of the Senate Committee, and will make amendments to the bill where necessary, where these amendments are necessary to address these differences. In response to the Senate Committee's recommendation, there will be amendments to clarify that the bill does not authorise the establishment of facilities for the purpose of civil nuclear power. That's very important that we understand that the enrichment of uranium or the reprocessing of nuclear materials. It's also will clarify or specify a requirement that the Director General or the Deputy Director General of the regulator must not have served at any time in the previous 12 months as a member of the Australian Defence Force or as a staff member of Defence or the Australian Submarine Agency. And that is to clearly have two separate, completely separate entities that will be independent. And it'll establish a committee, of course, an advisory committee, to ensure the Minister has independent advice relating to the range of matters, including, of course, not just limited to, but the operation of the bill after it's enacted, and the suitability of measures to ensure the independence of the Director General and member of the regulator. It'll allow for the Minister for Defence to share reports from the Director General with the Minister for Health and the Minister for Industry and Science, as the ministers responsible for ANSTO and PROUNSA, respectively, to provide for greater sharing of information and application of nuclear safety, best practices and other issues. And it will also ensure the more inclusive and robust offence for obstructing, hindering or intimidating a member or the regulator and persons assisting the regulator to further strengthen the regulator's powers and its independence. So, Deputy Speaker, the government will make other amendments to the bill as well, including to the extent the commencement of the bill from 6 to 12 months to ensure that we have an orderly transition to the new regulatory framework. And the government will also address concerns raised by the Senate Scrutiny of Bills Committee to clarify the operation of the seizure powers in Section 43 of the bill. But we know together that these amendments will strengthen the bill and ensure the highest standard of nuclear safety, which is the aim of this bill, the highest standards of nuclear safety within Australia's conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarine enterprise. We've decided, Australia has, I suppose, decided for many decades of nuclear safety regulatory experience and a robust framework to regulate current domestic civilian nuclear activities in fields such as science, medical research. However, this framework was not designed to apply in relation to the unique activities associated with naval nuclear in a military context. So the environments in which submarines operate are inherently hazardous and very different. And that's why this government is taking steps to establish the fit for purpose, specialised regulatory framework for nuclear-powered submarines. Deputy Speaker, while nuclear-powered submarines have a number of roles, they are, of course, Navy vessels designed to operate in hostile undersea environments. So regulating the nuclear safety aspects of this enterprise requires a system that is addressing the unique hazards and risks associated with sensitive military capability. The new regulatory system will consider the needs across the life cycle of a submarine to ensure the highest standards of nuclear safety and protection is applied. And the government has made the decision to establish this new independent regulatory statutory regulator within the defence portfolio, and the regulator will remain again independent, and its organisation will not be subject to directions or commands from the Australian sub-agency, the Department of Defence, or the Australian Defence Force in the performance of its duties. Having the regulator accountable to the Defence Minister is consistent with the need to ensure nuclear safety in the unique context of defence operations. So this approach is it's very consistent with the regulatory models in the United States and in the United Kingdom, which also have separate defence nuclear safety regulators. The government will also be amending the bill to strengthen the independence of the regulator by ensuring an appropriate separation period from serving in the Defence Force, which we see as very important. Deputy Speaker, this bill is extremely important in giving confidence to the Australian public that safety is of the utmost importance to our citizens, that safety is the utmost importance to the men serving on these submarines, who will be serving on them, and to give confidence to the public and to the Defence Forces that will be using them, that they will be absolutely safe. And as a South Australian, as I said earlier, the build of the submarines and the AUKUS project is a very, very huge project for us. And I think of South Australia, my home state, and I think of different periods in time where manufacturing has taken off. And you think, naturally, in my home state, car manufacturing, which was a huge thing in the 40s when it was announced by the then Chifley government, I think it was, that we will be putting money into a particular precinct to build manufacturing, including the Premier Playford at the time, which created thousands and thousands of jobs, but also it created cutting-edge technology for its time. And that served South Australia, it served its economy for over 50 years, for 60 years, right through to 2017 when Holden's closed its doors, Mitsubishi a bit earlier. It paid thousands of wages, millions of dollars to families to put bread and butter on the table. And I see this next round of manufacturing through AUKUS and through the submarines as the next cutting-edge revolution of manufacturing in my home state that will deliver thousands and thousands of jobs, thousands and thousands of manufacturing jobs, thousands of sustainable jobs that will keep our economy going for generations to come. That's why it's important that we get it right, and it's important that we give confidence to the public that safety is paramount, confidence to the Defence Forces that will be using the submarines, maintaining them, the workers that will be maintaining them, that everything will be checked and balanced to ensure that we have no issues with it. So this bill is about giving confidence to the public, ensuring that they will be able to have confidence in the government, whichever government of the day, once the regulators are in place, the bill, once it's implemented, and once the builds begin, with the first lot of submarines going out, knowing that there are certainly safety aspects that have gone through the ringer and will continue to go through that particular check continuously. Deputy Speaker, it also takes me to the point of ensuring that we maintain our capabilities in our region, and these submarines certainly will be doing that for us. We know that the nuclear-powered submarines are quieter. They can go out to sea for longer than what we currently have now with the Collins class and the diesel, and they will be certainly something that, with our partners our defence partners will be able to play a bigger role or a role in defending our nation. And as I started off in this speech, speaking in this bill, one of the highest priorities that any government has is to keep its public safe. And we do so through ensuring that we have the capabilities to be able to do that in a manner that is consistent with our defence partners and in a manner that ensures the utmost safety and the utmost confidence in governments that they are doing everything that they can to ensure that safety is number one and the priority.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call a member for New England.
Well, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm going to start this a long way from the seat. Back in 2001, I was at Cloncurry, and I was in a campaign for a Senate seat, which I was unsuccessful at, and I was having an argument with a guy from the Port of Newcastle, and it almost turned into a physical altercation, so common sense got the better of my valour, and I went back to my motel room. It would have been around about 11:30 at night, 10:30 in that area. I turned on the television, Mr Deputy Speaker, and there was this, I think it was a Bruce Willis movie on. I thought it was a Bruce Willis movie on. And I wasn't really interested in it, and the strangest thing happened. I turned to the next station, and you wouldn't believe it, they had the same movie on, exactly the same movie on. So I changed to the third station, and the same movie was on, and then I realised it was not a movie. It was an anniversary of today. It was 9/11, and terrorists had just driven a plane into the World Trade Center, and thousands of people had been killed, and also the Pentagon. What is important about that? It was the first instance of the rise of totalitarianism in a very emphatic way. The world had changed, and it changed right at that moment. And the rise of totalitarianism has continued. You'd have to say since 2001, on the 11th of September, it has not got better, it's got worse. We've seen Putin and his incursion into the Ukraine. Most especially, we've seen in our region the actions of a totalitarian regime in the Chinese Communist Party, not the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party, and their unilateral actions that work against democracy. Democracy is on the wane. Democracy is becoming smaller. And we have to understand how history works. If we deny history, we are total. Not only are we fools, but we're also dangerous. History pulsates in and out. Power pulsates in and out. Democracy pulsates in and out. And totalitarianism and the rise of one power to subjugate another, to take over areas, is just the nature of history. It's the nature of humankind. So we need to become as powerful as possible, as quickly as possible. It is absolutely indelible in what this nation has to do. We need a defence force because without a defence force, you don't have to worry about Indigenous policy, because there will be no Indigenous policy because you won't have a nation. You don't have to worry about climate change anymore. That policy's over because you don't have a nation anymore. You don't have to worry about your house because that no longer exists. Forget about your super, it's irrelevant, it's gone. Most importantly, the freedom for your children is also gone. They will live in a vassal state at the best, as supplicants and subject to an iron boot at worst. Now, people say that's excessive. It's not. That's just the history of the world. That's just how it works. And we have a massive step to take, and we better do it in a big, big hurry. If the other day, that round that was fired at former President Trump had got about 1.5 inches to the right, America, the United States of America, would be an entirely different place. It would have no doubt fallen into a form of civil strife. What is relevant to that is that would have a huge effect on Australia. Because what would be their concentration on foreign policy when they're dealing with massive issues on a domestic front? The issue for us is that other people would straight away note that. They would say, you are now weak. You are now weak. You will now have a different attitude to what we say to you, to the demands we put on you. And remember, the Communist Party in China has already put their demands on Australia. It's not hidden. They've written them. We know what they are. They're there. And are we at the position now where we're ready for that? Are we at the position now where if others who we rely on were distracted, we'd feel confident that we can defend our nation and all the issues, whether you're from the right or the left, that you hold dear? We had to make a huge step, and AUKUS was a huge step. At the time, as the Deputy of the National Security Committee, this was an issue that was imperative that we start this process. And this legislation, we've heard so much of the technicalities and the historical memoir of it is part of this. But it is only one part, and we have so much more to do. We have to become as powerful as possible, as quickly as possible, and to do that, it's AUKUS, but it's everything else. We have to be the best at agriculture. We have to have an education system which matches places such as Singapore. We have to have a manufacturing sector that thrives and grows and is absolutely at the forefront. We have to have the capacity to produce pharmaceutical goods. There is a whole breadth of issues that we have to go to the forefront of. And apart from the defence mechanism of nuclear submarines is also that it demands of Australia to become smarter, vastly more competent. It is going to require thousands of highly skilled technicians, nuclear scientists, the people from highly skilled boilermakers, fitters and turners, the whole gamut. And in fitting that process in, we have to have a wider agenda within Australia to grow, to nurture this. These people will not just turn up overnight, and nor when they're finished do we want them just to disappear. It's one of the aspects why we need also a nuclear power process in Australia. It fits hand in glove with this. And in part of this debate, we have to acknowledge in the defence of this nation how we need this skill set to work with it. I want for people to dispel a couple of notions. A couple of notions is, first of all, nuclear power works with about 3 to 5% enriched uranium. We've had black rocks that boil water, create steam, turn a turbine, create power. That's called coal. And we have another rock that boils water, creates steam, turns a turbine, or superheats gas, and creates power. That's nuclear. And that's at 3 to 5%. Highly enriched uranium is about 98%. What we are developing, and Australia is developing, but not in Australia, Rolls-Royce is doing it for us in the United Kingdom, but we are paying for it. We're developing nuclear reactors that are highly enriched to drive nuclear submarines. These are right at the cutting edge. They're right at the cutting edge of technology. So we show the willingness to do it at the area where it really does require skill set, and nuclear power is actually way down here. 3 to 5%, 98%. It's completely different. In fact, sometimes the fuel source for nuclear power is decommissioned nuclear weapons. So we should, in Australia, now we know where we are. We have got to take this step or live in the complete naivety that the world will just leave us alone. And that is so dangerous. That is so dangerous to think like that, because it just doesn't. Never has, never will. And if you doubt that, turn on the television and have a look at whether you want to look at the Gaza Strip or have a look at the Ukraine or all the other wars that just don't even make the news. There's one thing in common: the rise of totalitarianism. It is absolutely ubiquitous across the globe. And if you have a desire to protect the liberties and freedoms from everything from gender, sexual preference, environment, everything that we have, then you better be able to defend it. And if you can't defend it in the most exact form, then you can't defend it actually at all. So in this process, let's just go through a couple of things. I understand the role, because it is nuclear power, of intermittent power. And it's not renewable, it's intermittent. But one of the problems you have with intermittent power, just on a technical level, it's what they call sawtooth power. It works around about 50 hertz. All power has to work at 50 hertz, otherwise power just doesn't work. It's just physics. So you have an intermittent power where you have to, and it basically it works. It's generated a direct power. It has to be converted to an alternate power, and you just can't have too much of it. It just can't work. The industry just won't work with it. And if you said, how long does it take to build a nuclear reactor? Well, I'll tell you a country that built one in 6 years. Australia. Australia built one in 6 years, called the Opal reactor. It took us 6 years to do. So let's dispense with this idea it's going to take 20. There's probably in about the 12, 15-year build, which they suggest, about 6 years of that's paperwork before they actually start moving dirt. But once they start moving dirt, about 6 years, 6 to 8 years, and they've got it built. Isn't that what we should be doing, hand in glove with this? Isn't that what we should be doing? Well, we can't. We've got to get out of this naivety that we are smarter than everywhere else in the world. We're not. And we've got to also take the leap. For goodness sake, if Greta Thunberg can support nuclear energy, then I don't think it's a huge leap for us to. I mean, it stands to reason. If AUKUS is to work, and we are looking decades in front, and by gosh, I want it to work, we've got to also have a look at what is happening in the world right now. Right now. Right now, as we speak, there is a debate going on in the United States as to the prospect of where they are heading. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are having a debate. You have two alternate foreign policies that will be part of that. That will change in minutiae, we believe, in how Australia works, and I hope that is the case. But you can see that there is a variance. There is a fluidity. It is a discussion. There are discussions that are in the United States about AUKUS, overwhelmingly in support of us, but not entirely. And, you know, our biggest threat is if this thing falls over. Because where do we go next? What's the next step? What's the next step of this? You know, who do we honestly believe that when Wang Yi is going to Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, Kiribati, Solomons, Vanuatu, Fiji, having discussions with the Cook Islands, do we just think this is by chance? No, this is tactics against Australia. It always is. It's encirclement. You don't have to invade Australia. You just have to cut it off. If you cut it off, you win. You win. We have to take conditions. And are we formidable enough now to say that would be a dangerous move for you to do that? We have 6 Collins-class submarines. Sometimes we can't get one in the water. We have 3 warships, and calling them warships is, it's looking after the explanation. We have frigates, 8 of them. We have a defence force, which is actually getting smaller, not bigger. Overwhelmingly, our technology, the cutting-edge technology is imported, not made here. So, you know, if things turn against us, we're in a world of strife, because we have one big thing in our pocket, that we have a military agreement with the United States of America. And let's just go into that before I close. So your belief is that the good mums and dads of Tennessee and South Dakota and Carolina and New York and Los Angeles will happily send their family members over to be killed on behalf of Australia. That's what you're saying, that they'll happily do that. Well, I'm telling you, the mums and dads there, just like the mums and dads here, they might have other ideas about that. They might have a big say in the future about how they feel about that. They might say, well, I think we're just going to concentrate on the United States for a while. And if that's the case, those who wish to do us harm, and they exist, remember, we've had military lasers put on our planes from ships in our exclusive economic zone. Chinese ships in our exclusive economic zones. Foil put out in front of, flares put out in front of a Seahawk helicopter, foil in front of a P-3 Orion plane, spies in this parliament. We've had it, we've got it. So this AUKUS agreement is so fundamentally important I'm so glad that we have a bipartisan approach to it. I call to the Australian people and to all to just understand history. Don't understand my politics, disregard me completely, dislike me as much as you like. But like your history book, really have a good read of that. And as you have a read of that, think of all the things that you cherish about Australia, that your particular causes that you want to pursue and want to sustain. The only way they'll sustain that is if you have a formidable capacity to defend your nation. And we have a formidable gap to fill before we have the capacity to do that, and AUKUS is fundamental in that process.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Transparency and accountability are among the keys to voter confidence in public policy. If ever there were a textbook example of what not to do, it's AUKUS. What we have before us in this legislation is not the opportunity to decide the principles of AUKUS, merely to determine some of its operational contingencies, in particular the management of nuclear waste and arrangements for independent oversight. We've had relatively few opportunities in this parliament to debate AUKUS, so before I go to the specifics, I will take a little time to discuss the backstory leading to the legislation now before the House. I do want to make it clear that I'm not opposed to AUKUS, but I retain serious concerns about the way it was developed and then presented to the people as a fait accompli, as the best and only way, no discussion. Nothing that's happened since that surprise announcement from Scott Morrison, Joe Biden and Boris Johnson on the morning of September 22nd, 2021 has alleviated those concerns. It is, after all, the most significant shift in Australian defence policy since the 1980s, when we formally ended the doctrine of forward defence, whose hypothesis was our involvement in the Vietnam War for the primacy of the defence of Australia. That shift followed recommendations in a review commissioned by the Hawke government and produced by distinguished defence strategist Paul Dibb, followed by a white paper. And before the new doctrine began to take shape, with defence assets and infrastructure moved north and west, there was substantive public discussion and debate. That government sought to bring the public with them. That can hardly be said to be the case with AUKUS. Conceived in secrecy, Labor given less than 24 hours to make up its mind. Not surprisingly, the then opposition acquiesced, given its awful memories of having been wedged by John Howard over the Tampa saga. As national security expert James Curran, who's written extensively on AUKUS in the Australian Financial Review, says, quote, Treasury and the Department of Foreign Affairs were excluded from the process and serious risk and feasibility studies were largely sacrificed in the name of securing a politically symbolic deal, end quote. Treasury kept in the dark about an initiative hinging on the expenditure of at least $368 billion of taxpayers' money. DFAT kept out of the loop on an initiative with significant geopolitical consequences for our nearest neighbours. It doesn't matter whether China is the reason for this strategic shift. If China perceives that to be the case, then Beijing will respond as if AUKUS were a threat. Southeast Asia knows what it is to be in the cockpit of big power rivalry. From the millions of deaths and economic suffering resulting from the years of conflict between Japan, Australia and its allies in World War II through to Vietnam. Given the way AUKUS was dumped on an unsuspecting Australian public, it's not surprising that voters are proving more than a little sceptical, ambivalent at best. We, the people, were never let in on this discussion, let alone debate. A recent poll conducted by the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney found that 42% of those polled thought that the AUKUS submarines are not worth the cost. At the same time, 46% thought AUKUS is good for creating jobs. A poll conducted by the Lowy Institute got a different result, but still found that 32% of respondents, a significant number, were opposed to the acquisition of nuclear-powered submarines. Our strategic realignment in the 1980s was an assertion of sovereignty, an assertion that we should be as self-reliant as possible. Now, almost overnight, and with no debate at all, The previous government, with the acquiescence of the Labor Party, agreed to an entirely new approach, which, as the distinguished former DFAT chief Peter Varghese points out, reduces our sovereignty and ties us ever closer to the United States. Mr Varghese served both sides of politics in very senior and responsible roles, providing them with frank, fearless and objective advice, regardless of which party they came from. He was respected, in short, by all he served and rewarded for his intellect, insights and advice. Here's what he had to say about AUKUS in the Australian Financial Review, and it's worth quoting at some length. Quote, "The real test of sovereignty is whether you can defend yourself and credibly deter an attack on your territory. Is that what the nuclear submarines deliver? Or would it be smarter to design a defence capability including the best conventional submarines, which may give us less to offer in a war in Northeast Asia, but which may be more affordable and more effective in the defence of continental Australia?" He goes on, "I do not pretend to know the answers to these questions, but I would have thought that before we took decisions as momentous as the AUKUS submarines, that there would be a proper and forensic public discussion about other options and their underlying rationale." He says it may be odd to argue that a decision to acquire a capability which will not be fully delivered for 3 decades if all goes to plan has been made with unseemly haste. No one on the inside would think so. They have no doubt crunched the numbers and the policy options. But decisions of this magnitude can easily emerge in an echo chamber. And the biggest threat to good policy is a failure forensically to test assumptions and weigh options. Much of that can and should be done outside classified discussions." End quote. Unseemly haste and echo chamber. This is not the Greens talking. This is one of the most senior and esteemed public servants Australia has produced. "What defence capabilities are we not getting?" wrote Varghese. "Because we've set aside some $360 billion for nuclear submarines." Varghese was not alone in his concerns about Australian sovereignty. Alan Gyngell was an equally distinguished public servant, concluding his career as Director-General of the Office of National Assessments. Here's part of what he wrote, also in the AFR, about AUKUS in 2021, a year and a half before his untimely death. Quote, "Nuclear submarines offer Australia strategic and operational benefits. They go further and faster and stay longer at sea than their conventional counterparts. But," he went on, "they have one large strike against them. We cannot operate them alone. The capability they provide is only available to us if we cede a degree, quite a high degree in this case, of Australian sovereignty. Our capacity to operate the nation's most expensive and powerful defence asset will always be subject to American veto, and the program will lead inevitably to deeper operational integration with the United States." End quote. This is more than just a theoretical issue. China insists that it will absorb Taiwan one way or the other, and the US is adamant that it will not allow that to happen. This government has repeatedly denied that AUKUS would commit Australia and its new subs to support the US in military conflict with China over Taiwan. But as recently as April this year, US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell belled that cat. What he told a think tank in Washington was cloaked in diplomatic verbiage, but its message about American expectations of Australia was clear. Quote, "What we're confronting now are challenges that require a much deeper engagement with allies and partners, and I think the idea over time will be in a number of potential areas of conflict and in a number of scenarios." He goes on, "I think those practical circumstances in which AUKUS has the potential to have submarines from a number of countries operating in close coordination that could deliver conventional ordnance from long distances, those have enormous implications in a variety of scenarios, including cross-strait circumstances." End quote. Cross-strait circumstances. Well, I'll assume that's the waters between Taiwan and China that he's talking about. As for delivering conventional ordnance from long distances, that's what the US expects to be the role of our AUKUS submarines in the case of war between the US and China over Taiwan. That's what Washington thinks we've signed up for. And apart from informed scepticism expressed by experts in publications read almost exclusively by other experts, the question of the implications for Australian sovereignty rarely breaks the surface in broader discussion about Australia's relations with its most important ally. For all that, I do thank the Deputy Prime Minister and his staff for the in-depth briefings offered to me and other members of the crossbench on the various aspects of AUKUS Pillar 2 as well as Pillar 1, and for the attention he and his staff have paid to my specific interests in some of the detail of this bill. My most significant concern has been the question of storage of nuclear waste, an inevitable consequence of the acquisition of nuclear submarines and the rotation of US and UK subs through Fleet Base West. The original legislative proposal would have left open the possibility that high-level nuclear waste from American and British submarines, as well as our own subs, could have been left to linger on Australian soil. Low-level waste, gloves, hazmat clothing and the like are one thing. High-level waste is quite another, especially given that the UK, for example, has yet to find a way of disposing of the waste from its many decommissioned nuclear submarines long after they've left operational service. I'm really pleased to see that the Minister has listened to these concerns and those of others which emerged during consideration of this legislation by the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Legislation Committee. The government appears to have taken both my concerns and those of the committee at face value, and for that I thank the Minister. I'm pleased too that the government is proposing additional amendments designed to ensure accountability, transparency and independence of oversight of the safety provisions relating to nuclear waste. On the face of it, they mirror arrangements for the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA, to protect the community in relation to civilian nuclear waste. There would be an independent regulator to sit within the Defence Department, as occurs in the UK, rather than the US, where it sits within the Department of Energy for legacy reasons, going back as far as World War II and the Manhattan Project. There will also be an expert advisory committee because there needs to be a second line of accountability. Again, this would report to the Defence Minister and be appointed by the Minister. I'm concerned that there do not appear to be provisions for the expert advisory committee to report publicly, and I would far prefer an independent appointment process. Deputy Speaker, as I said at the start of my remarks about AUKUS more broadly, transparency and accountability are among the keys to public confidence in policy. These concerns will not end with the passage of this legislation, nor indeed any future arrival of AUKUS submarines. They will remain key for the lifetime of this ambitious and fraught project, and it is incumbent on this Parliament to keep its eyes open on these matters for the lifetime of this exercise. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
Order. The time being past 1 p.m, the Federation Chamber is now suspended and will resume when the chair is resumed at 4 p.m. today.